Phone on. And we're going to open up the hearing to HB 1504 FN and hear from the prime sponsor. You may do this together.
Good afternoon, members of the Environmental and Natural Resource Committee, and thank you for receiving my testimony. For the record, I am Representative Lucius Parshall, serving Cheshire District 8. House Bill 54 and Amendment 2024-12110 is not only good for the environment, but also good for municipal taxpayers' wallet. It diverts a generally difficult post-consumer product to the best resources for disposal and out of our landfills. My bare-bones concept of paint EPR was drawn from my own community's need for waste relief, but it was a bipartisan E&A committee that served as a crucible in crafting legislation worthy of our granite state. I'm available for questions, but I prefer to defer them to Representative Megan Murray, the main architect of this legislation, that unanimously passed in committee and on consent on the House floor. Thank you.
You're recognized. Thank you. And just introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Megan Murray, representing the towns of Amherst and Milford, and I'm the Deputy Ranking Member in Environment and Agriculture. I'm honored to be before you talking about a product that we all have stored in our homes for years. We're talking about paint. Currently, we as a state are working hard to find solutions that correct the disproportionate rate at which we dispose of items in our landfills. We're a bit upside down on our waste disposal hierarchy. This bill would help achieve reuse, reduction in disposal, and recycling over landfilling and unused paints. HB 1504 with amendment went through many iterations in subcommittee work sessions to stand up a framework where applicant organizations could apply to facilitate a program within the state for recapture, reclamation, and reuse. We heard from community political subdivisions and others seeking to expand this legislation and a program and start a program in New Hampshire. Currently, we're only one of 2 states in New England left to have no paint stewardship framework. Earliest adopters were in 2011 through 2013, and then in 2019 with the state of New York most recently adopting a framework. This bill as amended has received a unanimous vote in committee and was on to consent from our body to yours. And with that, I'll happily take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for being here. And I want to commend you in the House and Chairman Aaron for putting together an extraordinary bill. We've tried to do this many times, but this is a really smart and effective way to do it. And would it be fair to say that the important thing about this bill particularly is that it's not going to increase costs for municipalities and might in fact save us on potential sources of pollution?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, I believe so. And I think furthermore, this is pragmatic. It's offering also other resources then for additional reuse then for paint to come back in another form with various brands commingled together in a new form. And so it just keeps that closed circle environment going and it keeps it out of our landfills.
If I may follow up, Mr. Chairman. And would it also be fair to say that another great accomplishment in this bill is to have the kind of buy-in from the industry here, so that we have the folks who know best helping to manage this program and help the municipalities out in that management?
Thank you. Yes, that's accurate. And I also think that folks are looking for, I mean, as I mentioned before, a 20-0 vote out of our committee and then on the consent calendar. We are really looking for a creative solution that isn't taking dried material and putting it into a landfill or taking wet material and adding it to an additional heavy absorbent material and then putting it into a landfill. So this would be a creative approach, and I think there are those paint stewardship entities out there who are able to run effective programs to do this.
If I have just one more follow. And would it all be fair to say, you mentioned being a creative program, but in fact that, some bills like, trying to deal with this problem, there have been other states who have passed kind of similar things that are very effective, right? And they work, and they get the job done and avoid the pollution. So it's maybe new for New Hampshire, but this works, huh?
Yes, absolutely. And we know it's working in other states. And as I mentioned, we're just one of 2 states that don't have anything in the New England region from New York north.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it. Well done. Representative Bixby?
It's incredible they got this done. It's good.
So, for the record, Representative Peter Bixby on House Environment and Agriculture, and I'm going to be fairly brief with this. This is a bill that came before our committee several times over the last decade or so, and one of the things that was an impediment in previous versions was that it would have required retailers to take back the paint if they sold it. This bill does not do that. It makes it optional for the retailer to take back the paint, but they do have to pay into the fund, or actually the producer pays into the fund, and that cost is then recorded when the retailer sells the paint. So that's one difference. Another difference is that the previous versions did not all involve our existing recycling structures in the state, in our transfer stations, our city recycling centers, and this allows those centers to also be drop-off points, and so it's really working with our existing structure. So I think that those 2 things make this a substantially improved bill over the ones that we've seen previously. I think that and they make the model work for New Hampshire. And a number of other states have this program. It's working very well for them. What we've done with this version, and I have a lot of praise for Representative Murray in terms of the work that she put into the amendment. What this bill does is it makes a program that works well in other states work for New Hampshire, and that's pretty much what I have to say. I hope you agree as thoroughly as our committee agreed on it, which was 20-0.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
They're really happy about that 20-0, aren't they?
Yeah. Let's see. Lucius? That was you. Okay. You know what? I didn't capture your name in the beginning, and I couldn't read your tag, so I was just kind of guessing. All right. Representative Dutzy? What's the proper way? Dutzy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm Representative Sherry Dutzy, Nashua Ward 3. I just wanted to say briefly, in environment and agriculture, we see a lot of recycling, landfill bills, and the pressure that has been building over the last decade for us to really come up with some solutions. And I think HB 1504 really is a good starting point. One, because I think it's easily understandable by the consumers what we're trying to do. I believe it sets up a model that'll work for New Hampshire, and that basically is New Hampshire based, where we're not looking to put a lot of the onus on the consumer, and we try to balance out, which this does. I mean, the consumer pays in the beginning, but then we make it up at the end, where we're not putting a lot of extra things into the landfill and charging townspeople for that extra tonnage that gets carried away. So I just wanted to say I think it's a good model. I think it's a good place to start. I think down the road we're probably going to be getting more complicated bills, around other things to recycle. So I think this would be a very good test case. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee?
Nope.
You're not allowed to leave until we say. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, Representative, we appreciate it. Rep. Gorman, no, okay, I'm trying to get all, are there any representatives here that I didn't call on? Just want to make sure that I give you a chance, because I know you're busy. All right. Sarah? Is there a Sarah? Smile. It's a song. You got to. If you want to hand it to Jane.
Thank you so much for taking my testimony. Thank you so much for taking my testimony. I have worked in household hazardous waste for 35 years for the Lakes Region Household Hazardous Product Facility. That's the flyer that's attached to your handout. So I do have some experience in the hands-on portion of this. I will just go down through quickly what I have handed out to you. It explains my background and the fact that as site coordinator for LRHHPF, we have 2 member communities, but we do facilitate anyone from any other town on a fee basis. And we also take care of small quantity generators. So we have a pretty extensive program, and we're funded by the member communities. It's in their tax base. And my current 2024 budget is $99,914 with approximately 30% from Alton and 30% from Wolfboro. It's based on actual use at the end of the season. We get a DES grant based on population, which is usually somewhere between $2,000 to $3,000 a year. As you can see from my budget, it's a small amount, but don't get me wrong, we are very grateful to get that. In 1990, the amount DES household hazardous waste grants had for the entire population of the state was $200,000. 35 years later, it's the exact same amount, and it's based on population. And I checked the 1990 census, and it was 1,112,000 people for the state. 2023, they have 1,402,054 people. We get the second highest amount per population for our grant. We get 22 cents. We charge $50 for every 0 to 5 gallon increment for someone from away, trying to cover the actual cost. So you can see how desperate we are. The year-round population of Alton is about 6,000. Wolfboro is 6,600. We depend on the pristine waters and the clean environment for our livelihood. We are a tourist-oriented town. We have various ponds and lakes within the borders of both these towns, plus Winnipesaukee. And our budgets have been hard hit with the rise of all essential services since the pandemic, not the least of which is protecting the environment, and the cost of the safe disposal of household hazardous waste has not been spared. I have a 15% increase in my renewal of my 3-year contest for this year. Then the contract goes up another 10 next year and another 10 the following year. Lakes Region Planning Commission has another program in my area. Theirs went up 40% this year. We have to pay up to a 19.5% recovery fee on top of all of our waste hauling. It's a lot of money, and it's been really jumping. My last 3-year contract was 10%, 3 and 3. The one before that was 6% and 3 and 3, and we had a fixed 13% recovery fee. Our programs are like at risk. Both Alton and Wolfboro had default budgets, and a lot of towns did this year. And that puts us right on the edge of having to maybe discontinue programs. We've stopped collecting medical waste, well, not medical waste, but medications, because of the cost of 2 officers and a police, from various police departments of each town, and a pharmacist, because of our 15% increase. And the Lakes Region Planning Commission program has lost 3 to 4 towns just in the last 2 years because they're not able to even put in their small portion of 20 some odd towns altogether. We handle oil-based paint, flammable by nature. We have large number of gallons of the latex paint, which are disposed into solid waste stream, as Megan Murray, Representative Murray, pointed out, and that's a lot of extra cost by poundage to our towns, and it's a lot of unnecessary filling of very limited space in solid waste. Sorry, I hit the button. It's a very big waste of space in solid waste capacity. While other products are more expensive per 55-gallon drum to dispose of, oil-based paint is something we get in greater quantities. 2024, a 55-gallon drum is now $235 and change, up from $204. Flex bin of 101-gallon cans went from $1,211 for one flex bin up to $1,393. We sometimes ship as many as 3 on one collection day. We have an increase from $1,856 for setup fee up to $2,135, and all of those costs can have that up to 19.5% recovery fee. So our 22 to 23 grant paperwork indicates 656 households disposed of 27,882 pounds of HHW, with 23,277 pounds of the total being ignitable products, which are primarily paints and perhaps some oil and gas. It's not our most expensive, but is the one we collect the most of. Paint Care would relieve my hazardous waste costs for disposal because it would take disposal, transport, and recovery fee for both oil, paint, and take care of the cost of latex paint being shipped out by the ton. I observed the Paint Care program in Vermont 23 with Vicki Davis from Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning and Julie Ashton. She is a Hazardous Waste Certification Program Manager at DES at Addison County in Middlebury and Chittenden County in Burlington. They collect both types of paint at those two facilities. Burlington has the environmental depot where they recycle usable latex paint in 55-gallon batches of various colors. They add the appropriate mildew-resistant components and other chemicals to virtually turn them into new paint, which they sell for $11 a gallon. The oil-based paint and the non-recyclable latex paint they give to Paint Care directly. The cost of the Paint Care program is supposed to, by a small additional paint fee on new paint. It covers it. The manufacturers of paint support it because they would like to implement a program that is the same in all states. There are approximately 16 states that have it now, with New Hampshire, Missouri, and 2 other states. There's 4 states altogether that are in process, as we are here. And the neighboring New England states that have it are Vermont and Maine. After the Vermont tour, my representative, John McDonald, is also chairman of the Wolfboro Budget Committee, and we've had a number of discussions about the need and the challenge of reducing the burdens to local budgets. And he reviews mine. And perhaps the manufacturer's responsibility option of Paint Care, and it has a pretty successful track record, is the answer. And we really need to continue to safeguard our environment, and we have to try to ameliorate the costs. And Julie Ashton did a study this past summer, and she said she thought at least $100,000 should be added to the $200,000 in order to adapt to the rising costs. But I don't believe that's happening anytime soon. And I know Todd Piskovitz looked into Vermont and found out it was about, I believe, somewhere around 1/10 to 1/4 of a person that they would need for additional DES personnel, because I know they're always very short-handed as well. But I think we can really do this time. And I really thank you for taking my testimony, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? No. Seeing none. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, mine squeaks out. Is it Tim Josephson? No. Going once, going twice. Okay. So I'll have Todd come up. It says you want to speak, but it doesn't say you're in support or you're against. Welcome, Todd.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Todd Piskovitz. I'm with New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. I'm the administrator of the Hazardous Waste Management Bureau. DES is not taking a position on this bill. We support the ultimate goal of the legislation, which is to increase recycling, which obviously is part of our solid waste management plan. But we have some concerns about some of the language in the bill, as well as the resources necessary to implement the bill and potential economic impacts. I'd like to, I passed around a letter of testimony that you all got about 10 o'clock this morning, but in case you didn't print it, I brought a copy. Just a couple of the points on here. I'm going to talk about the second bullet point first. Oil-based paint in New Hampshire is regulated as hazardous waste, oil-based paints and stains. So if a facility were to collect oil-based paints, they would become a generator of hazardous waste. There's a way around that in this bill, and that this bill would designate paints collected as part of this program to be universal waste. It's still a category of hazardous waste, but it is regulated less stringently. The issue we have with the language in the bill is it says paint received at a collection location shall be considered universal waste. As that's written, to me, that includes latex paints, which currently are not hazardous waste. So I've given some suggested language that would clear that up, because if you designate latex paints as universal waste, they would then become regulated more strictly than they are at the moment.
Is that what you have in quotes?
Yeah.
Yes, and the italicized part is what I've added.
Yeah.
So after that, going back to the first bullet, page 1, lines 25 through 28 says, if properly managed, paints can be exempt from regulation as hazardous waste under RSA 147A. However, as I just explained, universal waste is still a hazardous waste, and it would still be managed under RSA 147A. So that language, I don't know if that language is necessary in that part of the bill, but if it is, it should be revised, because, as I said, universal waste, oil-based paints, if they were universal waste, would still be regulated under 147A. As far as the resources necessary, the third bullet, the bill doesn't clearly state that department billing for costs such as administrative and rulemaking costs would be applicable to be billed, so we're concerned about that. Finally, as far as the bullets are concerned, we're concerned about the timeline. Rulemaking would be required by July 1st of 2025 if this bill is approved. However, the stewardship organization is required to have their determination of what the fee would be to us by January 1st of 2025, which would only give us 6 months to write rules, which the rulemaking process, as you're probably aware, can be quite lengthy. So we're concerned about that. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Yeah. Senator
If I may.
Waters.
Yeah. Thank you for this. And I have a suggestion that perhaps you and the chair of the House committee could get together. It seems to me a couple things. That this is going to go to finance, most likely. And it'd be good for us to be able to get this in a shape that finance can pass it. So I would suggest a couple things. It seemed to me some of the wording changes in your first two bullets, that you can find something on that. What I want to ask a question about is that your last bullet on that page about administrative costs, and then the real kicker is about the staff, right? So could you look into whether it'd be possible for us to cover those costs from the program? And that would have implications about the stewardship funding, but I think you have enough money in this to make that feasible. And if that's the case, if you know, you and the chair and others could get together and write the bill that way, it solves a problem for us in finance, because the finance committee member here knows that we're not going to be able to swallow that probably. So in the general fund, and you know, your budget presentation to the governor is coming up, and so I just think that and thinking about some other states, that it seems perfectly reasonable in this kind of program that that kind of administrative costs and that staff be covered. The date change is pretty simple, right?
Right.
For the rulemaking. So anyways, that'd be my suggestion. If does that make sense to you?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Questions from the, further questions? None yet, okay. Reserving his questions for later, but thank you for your testimony. And Tim, welcome. Saw you nodding your head there, so you were in agreement with some of what was being said, so that's good.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just,
Sure. Hi, for the record, my name is Honorable Tim Josephson. I'm here on behalf of the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission, where I serve as I work as a planner, former representative for 2 terms in the House.
thank you for your service.
Thank you, senators, for having us here, and it's good to be back here. I just wanted to give some testimony. We take no position on this bill either way as an RPC, but I am our RPC's household hazardous waste coordinator, and we run our HHW collections in the Upper Valley. Do 5 of them a year, and we take all sorts of hazardous waste as previously described. But you know, we found that latex paint is not one of those things. And when people come to us to our collections, they say, "Well, I have all this latex paint. What do I do with it?" And I have to say, "Put kitty litter in it and throw it in the trash." Ooh. And they look at me like I got 2 heads, because that doesn't make sense. It doesn't jive with everything they've been told about paint and waste and all that. I had an opportunity to go to Phoenix last year for a conference where we got to tour several HHW facilities in cities like Tempe and Mesa and Gilbert, and we got to see firsthand what they do with their architectural paint recycling. These cities serve as collectors, and they are able to take in the recycled latex paint. They mix them there at their facilities, and they come up with basically gray and beige, because that's what happens when you mix them all. They're able to use it to paint their own municipal buildings. They use it around the city to paint wherever it needs. They give it out to community groups. They sell it to businesses at a low cost. So it makes its way back into the community. It's a cost-saving measure for their, on their bottom line. So we see it as a benefit in that regard. For New Hampshire to be able to take part in that, it just makes sense for frugality and being smart with our money and trying to look out for our citizens any way we can. The thing about the kitty litter and throwing that in your latex paint, an unintended consequence of that is it all of a sudden makes your trash much heavier. And so all your municipal dump fees and all those types of things just start going up. And we would love to see what happens after the fact of starting to recycle, latex paint, and see if that reduces our tonnage fees and how much waste we're actually putting out into our landfills. So, like I said, I'm happy to answer any questions about seeing this in practice. And thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for coming and testifying and for your service. Questions from the committee? Seeing none.
All right, thank you so much, Senators.
Is it Fawn? F-A-U-N? Or got it?
I think I might have spelled it wrong, Bill. 1698 is what I meant.
All right, so correct me. Did I pronounce your name right, though?
Fawn Godet? Yes,
Okay, yeah.
sorry.
No, that's all right, fine, that's fine. I just, I really have a habit of mispronouncing names. So.
Oh, yeah, I did a quote. Yeah, I'm where I'm at, but I won't speak, but thank you.
This one says support, and it doesn't say whether you want to speak or not. That's why.
I agree with Rep. Murray.
Okay. Come on, there you go. Step up, hit the mic. All right, make it red. That's it. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Fawn Godet. I completely support Rep. Murray on this. I think that this is important to make positive events to help protect our environment. Any questions?
Thank you for having the courage to stand up and speak up. Thank you. Appreciate it. I think I got everybody, unless Jeremy. Jeremy? Oh, welcome, Jeremy. And it doesn't say whether you're in support or opposed, but it definitely says you want to speak. So, welcome. Thank you. Yeah. And you're with the American Coding Association.
Yes, thank you, Chair Ivar.
Yes.
For the record, my name is Jeremy Jones. I'm with the American Coatings Association. I am the Director of Extended Producer Responsibility for the ACA, but my testimony today mainly pertains to my experience in my prior role as the program manager for the pain care programs in Minnesota, Oregon, California, and the state of Washington. Two of those programs, Minnesota and Washington, I was deeply involved in the legislative process, as well as working with the state regulatory agency on developing the rules and countering all of the quandaries that were alluded to in our previous testimony. I come today bearing lessons that I've learned from the passage of these laws, things that people perhaps wish they would have done differently, and a few things that I would like to bring to the table and to suggest, if I may, a summer study to iron out some of the details. I think because we only get to really pass legislation once, it's got to be done right. And I think in many of these cases, Minnesota and Washington specifically, things were done that I think that could have been avoided in getting it just right. Particularly the case of pertains to the current legislation, it's the fee setting process. I believe in the current language, it's set by the state. In each one of the pain care states, 11 of them, they're set by our organization, the American Coatings Association. The reason this is that we understand the program, the contractors, the vendors, how they work, what their prices are, what they should be, and it's how we deliver a cost-effective program. Run a very tight ship. We have to. The members demand it. We want to charge as little as possible in this fee, and we have great experience with it. So consistency across the states is also a really important component. We see things in this bill that do not really match with bills that have passed recently,
Like,
such as the stewardship organization not setting setting the fee. Language relating to, as was alluded to before, around the handling of the material. These are items that should be discussed in depth, and that's what I would hope the summer session would allow for, is to engage not just with the agency, but also with local stakeholders here to understand how the program is going to best work for the state of New Hampshire, and to weave any of those details into the language.
so how is it worked out in, say, Washington? What was the downside to this?
Well, one thing, again, this is pertinent to the language of this particular legislation, is the timeline.
Okay.
So one of the things that I guess I don't work with her, but she became a colleague, the lead administrator for the Department of Ecology in Washington. It was the timeline. The law was passed with a very aggressive timeline, and it gave us almost no time to create, the interim rules were needed to be created that needed to be cleaned up later. And basically the program was just, basically the firing gun went and the program had to start. And so the timeline, that can be tweaked in language, but knowing exactly sort of the details of how material will be collected, under what rules it will be collected, that is what the summer session would give the space to do. And I would plan to be here in New Hampshire to work with the agency and other stakeholders to iron that out.
Senator Waters with a question.
Did you have some more?
No, I'm still processing, but thank you. Are you
Yeah.
done your testimony?
Just wanted to make just one sorry, if I may.
I interrupted you, and I apologize.
Just wanted to make one key point I wanted to make. No, I just wanted to say as a last point, I just have deep experience with what makes a good program, and more to the point, as a legislative analyst, what makes good legislation. And I'd really like to, again, use the summertime to dig into those details, to get it just right, because I know what makes a good program and what language could.
So rather than the state setting the fee, you're saying who should set the fee?
In all of the other program states, including Vermont and Maine and Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York, the onus in the legislation is for the stewardship organization, Paint Care, to do a financial analysis that's audited and presented to the state. In other words, more work is done by the stewardship organization. There's less onus on state resources to actually devise the program fee, to administrate it. I think the other thing I would like to also address in revised legislation would be to ensure that the state's costs are paid. So in terms of, in all the other states, the language is very specific that any costs incurred in overseeing the program are borne by the product stewardship organization. There's no needing to sort of ask for it or anything like that. It's just built into the legislation that costs of oversight, actual costs are paid for, and just part of the program budget.
Senator Waters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, not so much a question as just a couple of thoughts. I really appreciate your expertise, and good to know what the other states are doing. And I think it would probably be helpful for you to talk with the chair of the committee or the sponsors of the bill about some of these points. But let me know just a couple things about New Hampshire.
Sure.
That it's extraordinarily rare for us to allow another entity to set fees aside from the legislature. And also, a lot of the things that you mentioned are in fact what we do in our rule process. And that process is very thorough, and it also is a legislative process, because rules have to be presented to the Legislative Rules Committee and passed as if they are legislation by that body. So I think if you look on page 4, lines 24 to 30, you'll see that that's the process we envision. That it has a range of costs, but then you'll see there's an annual review, and the rulemaking would take into account things. The last point you make about the cost being borne by the stewardship program, that was the point of the previous conversation, that the agency has come forward to us and said, we've got some costs. And so that's why a potential amendment would clarify how those would get covered.
Right.
So anyways, I mean, you're making excellent points. And I think that if there's some things that, I mean, we do it different here in terms of fees and things. But I think if you were to talk with the chair, there might be, I think it sounds like you might have some other advice too that might actually be helpful for the rulemaking process. But I'm sorry just to talk at you, but you raised good points and I wanted to just zero in on them. But thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
What part of Washington?
What's up?
What part of Washington?
Washington State?
Yeah. What,
I lived in Portland, Oregon.
okay.
But
I was born in Everett, so I was just.
I've been all throughout. I've been to every county in Washington, so very familiar.
Yeah, right on the, I was right on the ocean. That's why I love the ocean.
What's your connection with him? That's my best friend, Paul Goodwin.
Oh, really?
Goodwin family, yeah. Or never mind, sorry.
Well, that's fantastic.
I love Washington. It's a wonderful state. Sorry. If I just may make one more, to your point, Senator Waters, there is no one way to do this.
Yeah.
Certainly, I acknowledge that. In California is a perfect example, a state that I've worked in for a better part of a decade. They have an entirely separate rulemaking process that's done by CalRecycle, and that is certainly one way to do it. It's totally an open book in terms of how it's done. I'm not meaning to present sort of this is how we do it. I meant to say that the process that I was talking about is more of a consultative process with the agency, which we have not had the time to pursue. We've had some preliminary conversations. We're just hoping for the space of the summer study to have those conversations.
Well, that's why what you're bringing to us is valuable, because we've got to get it right, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing that, really thank you for your testimony. All right.
Appreciate it.
And you're our final speaker, so we're going to close the hearing.
Well,
Meg? Oh, I don't know.
I don't know.
Come on, I was just kidding you. Good.
Thank you. Just point of clarification, if I may. I did want to make sure that within the bill there are opportunities for a management organization to have a conversation about the fee structures.
Okay.
And so that is enumerated in this
Yeah.
bill.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to also then state that there is an opportunity for us to obviously address some of the other concerns about the build-out time. And I'm happy to continue to work. If this committee wants to work through a work session or we do it somewhere else, I will be an active participant. So just please know that.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming back up, because I do have a question. It's great to see all of you from the E&A committee over here in the Senate. We love having you here. Glad to host. I've been reviewing the fiscal note in here, and it does appear the department raises some good points about the funding of this. Did you have conversations on the House side about an appropriation that was necessary?
We did, and so in discussing some of this, we also understand that in rules, they would also be ensuring that the funding mechanism was such that it would be self-sustaining, and that was really the goal, was through the the process then to then have the yearly audits done to ensure that the fee structures yearly were able to keep the program viable and it wasn't operating at a loss.
Okay. But the follow-up, if I
Yeah.
may, because it looks like they're going to need something in possibly even '24 as far as to sort of get the program rolling. I just was curious if you guys had discussed the need for an appropriation. Really was my.
We did have a discussion around that, and there was some brief discussion about that there would be an initial ramp-up cost, and then the department did state that it would fall back down because the program was then up and rolling, and it was self-sustaining.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, thank you. And you're hearing something important here, and I think that, as I was trying to suggest earlier, it really is going to be a lot better for the bill's fate in the Senate if you work out a way to cover those costs. And if it means that you put out the effective date a little bit so we don't have a 2024 issue, and that something can be worked out that the stewardship program covers the cost for DES, I think the bill will have a better fate in finance. So
I understand.
But see what you can do. See
Okay.
what you can do.
And we'll, I'll
But
hold
that's
on to
important
this
what the
if we need to
senator's
make
saying.
an amendment or
Yeah.
something like that. Just,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Closing the hearing, and we're going to open up the hearing for 1565 FN. When Phil's ready? You all set? All right. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. And we're going to hear from the prime sponsor when he's ready. So, maybe,
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Dan Innes from Bradford, New Hampshire, representing District 7. And I'm here this afternoon just to present an amendment to you, and I'll be brief with my presentation. I know there are some folks who will be following me in testimony, including some House of Representatives members who will be able to speak more eloquently than I. But let me give you the gist of what we're trying to do here. And I have talked with DHHS, specifically with Colleen, and they have some concerns around this amendment, and I appreciate those concerns. We talked about those, and I still think it's a good idea to give this a little bit of a hearing and some consideration and see where we end up, and maybe we can make some progress, or at least learn some things that will help us to be better at this next time around. So this bill originated really out of a discussion that was a part of a committee that met this past fall to try to make it easier for small farms to process meat. And there was some discussion around homemade foods and the fact that it can be sometimes difficult to sell those because of regulatory issues and other concerns. So the general idea, one of the things that is important to me, is helping small producers, small businesses, small farms to be successful and to find ways to market. We talk about farm to table and all of that, and then we make it really hard for farmers to do that and for small businesses to do that. So this amendment provides, I guess, a mechanism of sorts for some of these homemade foods to find their way to market. It does provide for possible inspections if requested by the provider, but it does not require inspection by anybody. But the transactions that take place must be between the producer and the end consumer. It cannot be to a retailer or a wholesaler. It has to be a direct sale. The food products need to be labeled, indicating it has not been inspected, hasn't gone through the normal processes, almost a buyer beware sort of statement. The items are sold solely for home consumption or potentially for consumption at a traditional community social event. So a Greek festival or something along those lines conceivably might include foods of this sort. Consumers have to be informed of the exact origin of the food that's prepared and informed, again, that the producer is not licensed, certified, or any other way approved by the state or locality. Again, may not be sold at a retail store, but may be donated to events. And I'll leave it at that. If there are questions, I'm happy to try to answer those. Again, I know Representative Aaron is here. She's passionate about this, and I think she signed up to speak, if I'm not mistaken. So I know she'll be a helpful person as well.
And thank you, Senator, for your amendment and for bringing this forward. And obviously, it goes with House Bill 1565, right?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and you happen to be a co-sponsor on that bill as well.
Indeed.
And seeing no questions, you have a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator, for taking my question.
Of course.
On page 2,
Yes.
the section G, traditional community social event.
Yes.
So all of these things are things that, they're large. They're large events. So this is more than a bake sale kind of thing, And I think I'm a little concerned that G sets up an unfair advantage for these, unlicensed, inspected, no sanitation requirements necessarily, that then can go out to these big community events that then gives, an unfair competitive advantage to our local businesses that are doing these kind of things. So we have, you represented this district, so we do have the farm stands and the smaller community-owned bakeries and catering shops that, like, for instance, I just bless you, just catered an event. Really small event. We catered for 70 people, but it came from a very small operation in Hampton, but their kitchen had to be inspected and licensed.
Yeah.
And it seems like this would set them up for having a competitor that would have a really unfair advantage, that they could also do those small catering events like these things, but they don't have to abide by the same kind of health inspection rules that, say, Victoria's Kitchen does.
Right. And I understand that concern and appreciate it. I think you have to look at the total competitive landscape, though. These are companies that are set up with brand names that are recognized. They have economies of scale that the small producers don't. They're likely doing far more than a single item. We're sort of envisioning with this, Old Home Days, and somebody makes a bunch of brownies for Old Home Days and sells them there. Things of that sort. It's not designed in any way to set these folks up to directly compete with larger companies that make this their livelihood. This is a much smaller scale operation, and honestly, I don't think it would impact them too much. But I do understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate the concern.
Can I follow up? Okay, so thank you for clarifying that. The best way for us to have this conversation is, for me at least, is to use examples.
Sure.
So, for instance, when we have the Stratham Fair, right, and we have a community gathering, the volunteer auxiliary does, it's called the Red Food Truck.
Yes.
And so volunteers do a bake sale, if you will, right?
Right.
And the scouts do their own homemade lemonade for that event.
Yes.
They're allowed to do that right now.
Correct.
And so it sounds, how is this differentiated from those events? Because I think that's what you're talking about, is like an Old Home Days or a community gathering.
Yeah.
Yeah, so how does this make that, what we do now, different?
I don't, in the sense that the small home producer,
Yeah.
let me back up. The purpose of the amendment isn't necessarily for Old Home Days and large celebrations. In fact, that really wasn't the motivation for it, I don't think. It's more to allow those small producers to do things locally, to maybe sell out of their home or sell out of their farm store and get product to consumers. I don't think too many folks are going to be saying, let's go to the Stratum Fair with the stuff I made in my kitchen over the last 6 weeks, trying to get ready for that volume of people. It's highly unlikely that would be a situation we would encounter. I think a much smaller situation is much more likely. Maybe the Greek festival was a bad example, but I could see, a family reunion or something along those lines. Or again, a very small community's old home days. Bradford at the Historical Society. Every year we have an event there. There might be 100 people there. That's kind of it. It's a one-day, short-term event. Stratum Fair is an entity unto itself, and I really don't think most of these producers would be able to scale to that level. But I understand what you're saying. Maybe there's something to be done, an amendment to the amendment, that would more carefully specify where those sales could occur, and I'd be amenable to that.
I have one more follow-up.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm trying to figure out where this sits.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to an event in town. We have in Hampton, we have Dean's Hot Peppers, right?
Okay. Yep.
And they do daily takeout, and they make their own hot pepper sauce. So they make their own hot pepper sauce, but they also make meals to go.
Yes.
They have to be inspected as
Correct.
a kitchen.
Yes.
Right. So they have to meet all those health inspections.
Yes.
And somebody who we have some farm stands that just make jelly from
Yes.
their own product, and they sell it at their farm stand.
Yes.
They are not inspected.
That's correct.
Right. So would this allow for the non-inspected, I made jelly from my own strawberries, and like if you want to buy my jelly off the Stratum Circle, how does do they now get to take their product and sell it in the same venue or in the same way that Dean's, who has to abide by all of the health inspection rules to be able to go to a broader market? Like, where's that space? That's what I'm looking for, is this, I'm in a gap.
What has to happen here,
Yeah,
according to this amendment, is it has to be a sale directly to the end consumer, that person who will eat it. So you can't sell it to somebody else and then have it sold, right? You couldn't sell it to the Red Food Truck and have them sell it to their customers. That's not what this does. It says that I can sell to you for you to use it in your home or some other place, but that's kind of it. It is not designed to open up large-scale events and that sort of thing to small home producers. Those things don't match up very well. The capacity isn't there in somebody's home kitchen to really meet those things. But again, I'm open to some clarifying language if that will help.
I'm wondering if I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's when you say like opening up to chatting about the capacity, if there is a volume, right?
Could be.
That that over a certain volume, like if I tapped and boiled my own maple syrup and then, started competing with Senator
Pearl?
Who it's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time. It's an unfair advantage to me because like no one's coming to look at what I'm doing in my kitchen necessarily or in my cellar.
Yeah.
And that seems like that's where I think there's a volume question here before you just, because what's to stop me from putting a commercial kitchen in my house? You know what I mean? Scale. And then start catering to what's in G.
I understand. I would also take you back up to line 12, B.
Page 1?
2. The section shall not preclude an agency from providing assistance, consultation, or inspection as requested by a producer. If I were doing this in my home, I'd ask for an inspection so I could represent to my customers I've done that and I've followed the rules that the state has put in place. Now, I don't know if DHHS has capacity to do all of that inspecting or the communities where this might happen. For example, Portsmouth has its own inspector, right? Kim. So I know her. And, that's a different situation. So as I say, I did talk with DHHS and there are some things we would need to work through on this, but I do appreciate the points you've raised, and they're good ones, so thank you for that.
And I know you got something else to go to, so if you want to work offline at some point,
Happy to, yeah.
We'd appreciate it, and thank you for bringing the amendment.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
And now we're going to hear from the prime sponsor of 1565, Rep. Coulon. How did I do? Is that your last?
Coulon, yeah.
Yeah, Coulon.
I'm an Irish guy with a French last name, so that's how that happened.
Ah,
Is this on?
well, welcome.
Thanks for having me today. HB 1565 was introduced as the Right to Homestead Act to modernize New Hampshire's cottage food statutes in order to increase food security, create entrepreneurial opportunities, and make providing mutual aid via community events simpler. The committee and other stakeholders initially found the bill to be too broad, but a compromise was made to remove certain acidified foods from the hazardous foods list. Now, pending the introduction of Senator Innes's amendment, HB 1565 has a chance to regain some of its former substance and be more helpful to the homestead foods community in New Hampshire. So please consider supporting the bill and its proposed amendment to help strengthen food security in New Hampshire. So I support both the bill and the amendment, whatever the committee deems fit. I'm down with it, and I'll take any questions.
Well, we're up with questions. Any questions for the committee? Yes, Senator Waters.
Thank you, and I appreciate the bill. And I just wanted to check with you on I looked online about, the FDA on the 4.6 and the 4.2 on the acidified, and that's pretty much what we'd be governed under. I mean, the definition we're striking out in the acidified, that's the 4.6.
Yeah, with my understanding of it, it makes it so people could sell salsas and certain canned foods, but not, like beans or something like that, low acid foods. That's my understanding of it.
I was just looking, if I may, I was looking at statute, and I'm assuming because it's an FDA regulation that what we're calling low acidified comports with the 4.6.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's clear. Thanks a lot.
Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, guys.
Representative Aaron. Chairwoman Aaron. Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. And just for the record, I'm Representative Aaron. I represent District 4 in Sullivan County for the towns of Ackworth, Goshen, Langdon, Leominster, and Washington. And before you today is House Bill 1565. This came to us as with another bill as well in the House, which we held back for interim study, which sought to make substantive changes to the way in which we do homestead foods and licensure and all of that, inspections and so forth. And what we did was we said, okay, what we'll do with this bill is at least we will work on doing an expansion of what farmers and homesteaders can offer at their food stands, and in coordination with working with DHHS Food Safety Division. They were open to allowing people who were not licensed and who were making foods out of their homes from their farms, that they would be able to sell relishes, salsas, and pickles. So it actually turned into a pickle bill. And so that's what happened with this bill. We stripped out all the other homestead type language, and we felt that what we wanted to do with that is work with the other bill, which we interim studied, sit down with DHHS Food Safety and other stakeholders, farmers and so forth, and see where we can clarify the laws that currently exist, make them more simple because they're kind of confusing right now, what people can sell, what they can't sell, what they have to be licensed for, what they don't have to be licensed for. And as a result of the confusing RSAs that we have now, we do have people who are producing foods and sort of flying under the radar and hoping they don't get caught. And I just want to be able to clarify everything, work through those statutes, and come up with a comprehensive changes to the way in which we do those things through our interim study. And I am hoping to do that starting in June when we can work on interim study bills. So, but the bill as it is, that's before you today, right now, is basically just allowing for pickles, salsas, and relishes to be sold via homesteads, and everybody was fine with that. So that's where we are, and I'd be happy to take any questions. I don't think you have to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Senate.
Well, tables have turned, eh?
Yes.
You were here before my committee the other day.
Yes, I was. Have you had a chance to review Senator Innes's proposed amendment?
I haven't really taken a real good look at it. We had just brief conversations about it. But I think that, you know, certainly some of his concerns and some of his wishes for that language could certainly be incorporated into the interim study that we're planning on doing. And, I really do want to take a deep dive into what the language is now and how we can improve it so that we can help our farmers diversify more.
Well, I appreciate your commitment to agriculture. We certainly need it and appreciate it. I will just make one suggestion. If you're going to look at the language that he's proposed, there is a conflict with the raw milk statute within his bill because of labeling requirements. So if you're going to look at that, it's just something to consider, okay?
Right. Okay, certainly. I'll
Other
take
questions?
that under advisement. And, I just also want to say, I have a fair amount of constituents who have farm stands who are really, really interested in and they're not, they don't have commercial kitchens and all of that, but they really want to be able to sell chicken pot pies and beef casseroles and things like that, especially if they are raising chickens, if they're raising their own beef and slaughtering it USDA certified and all that. They want to be able to sell pumpkin pies and custard pies and things, and they have the refrigeration and freezer capacity to be able to offer those kinds of foods. I also want to make it clear that, right now when we have our community soup kitchens, they're not licensed or inspected and that kind of thing. And foods are sold, those kinds of foods are given out to the public every day. We don't have people dying in the streets as a result. So I think there needs to be some common sense, but we also need to have, what we're looking at really is food safety risk management, and how do we do that in a common sense way.
Senator Altshuler with a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I missed the number of the bill that you interim studied in the House, which is not important for this discussion, but in your anticipated deep dive into homesteading foods, are dairy products included in that? Because that is...
That's going to be a discussion that we'll have
Okay.
with DHHS Food Safety Division.
Right. I also picked up on the milk issue and thought, okay, there's some awesome food happening, and to pave a way for it without disadvantaging some of our smaller catering operations and businesses. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate your looking into that over the summer. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Any further questions?
No.
Seeing none. Thank you very much for your
Good.
testimony,
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yep.
Representative Bixby. Welcome.
Good afternoon. For the record, Representative Peter Bixby from Stratford 13, Dover, and also House Environment and Agriculture. Representative Aaron covered a lot of what I was going to be talking about. I just wanted to sort of boil it down to a couple of very clear things. One is that the bill, as you have it before you, we amended because we had assurances from Food Protective Services that this was something that was clearly possible and safe and didn't require further investigation. There's a lot of other stuff that was in the original bill and that was in its companion bill has potential, and we are interested in doing something with it. And some of that stuff was in Senator Prentice's Innes's amendment. And I think that the questions that Senator Altschiller was asking about Senator Innes's amendment are exactly the kind of questions we're going to be asking in our interim study. And I would really plead with you that you leave this bill just as it is, so we can so we don't even need to accede to it. It'll just happen. And let us do the interim study, and we can cover all the details, including the ones that are in Senator Innes's amendment, and when we do our interim study. And we will be working with Food Protective Services, we'll be working with a broad range of stakeholders, and we will be covering it very thoroughly. Because in our committee, we really do interim study when we say we're going to.
Well, we do too.
I wasn't implying that you didn't. I was just saying that there is sometimes out there the gentle death of interim study. That's not what we do.
So,
Get that knife out of your
yeah. Save the pickle bill. All right, here we go. Questions from the committee. Thank you, Representative. We appreciate your time. And our last speaker is Colleen Smith, wishing to speak from DHHS.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify on House Bill 1565 relative to the definition of potentially hazardous food. For the record, my name is Colleen Smith. I'm the administrator for the food protection section, which sits in the Department of Health and Human Services. I want to echo what Representative Aaron and Representative Bixby has said, is that we are really committed to working with the House Environment and Agriculture Committee over the summer on looking at food safety regulation in the state. We get many, many questions from small producers stating that the rules and statutes are confusing now. I agree 100%. I would caution you on the amendment to this bill because I think it will just add confusion. There's a lot of new terminology, some points that were brought up earlier about a traditional community event, what that definition is. We also have definitions currently in statute for an occasional food service establishment, an occasional food service event, which many old home days currently operate under. When I looked at the definition and the amendment, there was a person that offers food at weddings and funerals, and in my mind I'm trying to distinguish how that might be different from a caterer who might just service those types of events and as part of their food operation. So I really feel like there's a lot of new terminology in the amendment that would kind of create more confusion, and we really are committed to working over the summer on looking at what are some safe ways through food safety education of small producers, labeling requirements so that someone doesn't unintendedly add a food allergen to a food. So that, certainly we worked very hard with the House committee on this compromise. We think it's a small step in going forward with the anticipation of working with the committee over the summer to look further into food safety regulations for small producers. And happy to take any questions the committee might have.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony. We're going to close the hearing. I'll exec it if we can do it real quick.
Move exec.
Second.
All in favor of exec? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll move 1565 ought to pass.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor of 1565 FN to pass?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none. Who wants to take out the pickle bill?
Senator Altschiller, I think.
Oh, I'll do the pickle.
Okay.
Acid tongue.
Wow. Motion to move out of exec?
Go for it.
All in favor of out of exec? All in favor? All right, done. All right, look at that. See, we got one done. No minutes. Oh, yeah. So we got a lot of speakers on the next bill,
We don't
so.
want it to be a sour situation.
Yeah, we don't want it to be a sour situation.
That's our bread and butter here.
Do you have any more?
Too sweet mix.
Yeah. We're gonna hear from the prime sponsor of 1698. Sorry for having fun. It is getting late. 1698 FM. And hear from our firm sponsor. And Madam Chair, you have the floor whenever you're ready.
Thank you again. And again, for the record, I'm Representative Judy Aaron, representing Sullivan County District 4, which is the towns of Acworth, Goshen, Langdon, Lemster, and Washington. I'm also Chair of Environment and Agriculture in the House. So before you today is HB 1698, relative to the use of drones for aerial application of pesticides. I brought this bill forward as a result of discussions with New Hampshire Farm Bureau. And what this bill allows for is the aerial application of pesticides by persons possessing a valid certificate for registration of, pesticide application. And they may be able to use drones to apply said pesticides for agricultural purposes, using drones as defined in RSA 422:3, which is the federal definition of an unmanned aircraft. We set this for spraying at a height not exceeding 20 feet above ground level. The original bill had set 50 feet, which was too excessive. We recognized that 20 feet was more reasonable and also eliminated the possibility of drift of any kind of pesticides. Right now in our state statutes, the only way in which pesticides can be applied aerially is by airplane or helicopter. I don't believe that has been done in several decades. But we do have this new technologies that other states are using, which is drone application of pesticides. And so that's where this bill originated from and how we put it together. It's pretty simple. And in essence, the application of pesticides using drones is more environmentally friendly because you're not using so much pesticide as you would be by using it through, an air crop dusters or helicopters or dropping it out of, planes or whatever. But it's more environmentally friendly. It is also more economical for our farmers so that they are not having to spray on huge pieces of their acreage. They can spot spray where they need to take care of certain problems. And so we felt in my committee that this bill made total sense. And we think it'll be a great help for our agricultural community.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Questions from the committee? Senator Pearl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming in.
Sure.
As you know, many of the farms deal with situations, and I thank you for bringing this bill, because many of the farms deal with situations of access when they have breakouts within their crops, such as burr cucumber or something of that instance that can be a small section in a very large area of a field. And I want to thank you for bringing this bill, because getting access to those areas is very challenging when the corn is 6, 8, 10 feet tall. And so I wanted to thank you for doing that, and I appreciate all the work you've done on this, and it looks like you brought us a pretty good bill, so thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And the other thing about being able to spray with drones is that certainly with truck spraying now, if the ground is wet, your truck can get stuck. Yes, you don't have that issue. I'm sure you've experienced that. But with the drone spraying, you're spraying from up a higher, up above. And this is even a better technique than truck spraying, because the drones are spraying down instead of spraying up where the trucks spray up. And also you have with the rotors that are on the drones tend to also push the pesticide more towards a target as opposed to it, spraying all over. So yes, the drone spraying is more targeted, more controllable, and just a better method.
Follow-up? Did you also hear in testimony that many times with the drone application, they're using a very low water per acre basis, it's very concentrated.
Yes.
Because they can't carry the water, whereas a truck is using potentially a larger, higher quantity of water per acre, which sometimes can cause drift. But I think you've done a good job in finding the sweet spot here on this, keeping it below 20 feet.
Yep.
And it very much should do the job as it's intended in controlling drift. And I think
Yeah,
you've
it
done
does a
great
better
job.
job of controlling drift too, because drones can't fly on windy days. So, it cuts down on when you can be applying these pesticides.
Representative, how is this enforced?
How is it enforced?
Yeah. Well, how
The
do you
same
know?
way I would imagine that truck spraying would be enforced. But I'll tell you that, farmers would most likely employ a business that is in the business of drone spraying. They will contract with a company that does this and who has a lot of experience in doing that. So it's sort of really, really helpful for the farmers.
Senator Waters with a question.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Madam Chair. So obviously, we've heard a lot from the pollinators about this.
Yeah.
And I wondered, I have drafted an amendment, and basically it would say that the existing notice would still apply within 200 feet of the proposed treatment area if there were registered beekeepers, who, so we know who they were. So the notification process could work. So that would be an option to deal with the concerns of the beekeepers. And I know you had some conversation about these things in the
Yeah.
House, but I wondered about that notion that we, if we would have to have the notification requirement for registered beekeepers if it was going to be within 200 feet. And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we had grappled with the idea of notification in our committee.
Yeah.
And it was just very tough for us to figure out who to notify, when to notify them, how to notify them. We then were given information from Farm Bureau saying that currently when farmers truck spray, there is no notification required for that. And this is very, very similar to truck application of pesticides, so that, and also with the reduce of drift going on, that it was felt that probably didn't need the same notification that you needed from aerial spraying from airplanes or helicopters.
Yeah.
And so we left the notification piece out. I get that, there are concerns about that. Some folks from the Department of Agriculture Pesticide Review Board was saying that typically with these drones, they're not spraying neonics type pesticides, so that there's less of a chance to damage any kind of foraging bees coming through. But that's certainly something that your committee can consider with regard to notification. But it was really just kind of a difficult thing for us to kind of tease out who to notify, when, where. I suppose if there was something that said, to notify those beekeepers who are on the registry, that's at least some place for a farmer to start. But I don't know how it would be done. And I wanted to get the bill out, so.
So thank you. May I follow up?
Well,
yeah. Isn't it fair to say that in terms of the notification, the process of notification we have for aerial is what it is. And so the amendment would just say, do what we already have. Whether that works or not, I don't know, but that's what we do have in terms of the methods. But isn't it the idea here that if it flies and it's not on tires, that's different from a ground operation. And so maybe if somebody's a registered beekeeper and it's within 200 feet, then they ought to be notified just the way other people were notified when there's aerial spraying. So is that, you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah, and I suppose you can consider that as, you know, your committee reviews this. But my thought on this was that since this was so similar to truck spraying in terms of proximity, and that there was such a lessened issue with drift, that you know, it wasn't really imperative to put it in. But I'll tell you that the notification process that is already in place, I don't believe has ever been used. So
Maybe true.
that's another thing altogether.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Thank you. One final one. So is it your belief that by lowering the level to below 20 feet, that you were essentially simulating the very similar drift to what you're going to get from a ground application? Is that was that the thinking behind changing that? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thank you for your testimony.
Okay, appreciate it.
Commissioner?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Sean Jasper, Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food. I am here in strong support of the bill as amended by the House. I won't repeat what Chairman Aaron has stated, but I do agree with her. And you know, I understand the issue of people wanting notification. The reality is there are a lot of people who don't register, haven't registered, and hives move fairly frequently. They're not necessarily stationary. What I've suggested to people is how about a little cooperation? If you have a hive near a field, talk to the farmer. Let them know your hive is there. Ask them if they'll notify you if they're going to be spraying. That seems to be what we should really be doing. I can't imagine that there would be a farmer who would say, no, I'm not going to let you know, because they know what the consequences are going to be if there is not that cooperation. Beekeepers need the plants, the farmers need the bees, and let's start working together. And I think this is more a case of people being afraid of what they don't know. Not only do I think that this is somewhat similar to truck spraying, I think it's actually a lot better because it can be targeted. And if you're trying to spray a large field and you have, you know, 100, 200 feet wide cornfield or something, and you can't get to it, you're going to be spraying a lot higher, and that's going to be subject to the drift. So everything that I've seen, everything that I've read says this is better for the pollinators. And I don't know what more I can say on that. You know, we have not had aerial application in the time that anybody can actually remember in the Department of Agriculture. So there has been no notification. There hasn't been anybody spraying crops in, you know, in the time that anybody who works in the department's been there. So we don't know how that would work. But again, there's really no enforcement mechanism there. I was just looking at, you know, what are the penalties? Well, it says I can put administrative fines in place, and you know, how does all that work? This is a better method of applying pesticides, and I really think that the beekeepers, and I will say that while I saw the notice that the beekeepers had unanimously voted against this, I was at their annual meeting. I'll tell you, this is one of the greatest groups, agricultural groups in the state. They're very engaged. They're very participating. That wasn't a vote that took place there. I believe this was a vote by their board of directors, and there's nothing in their bylaws, and I've read them, and I've had a member who actually is our apiary inspector read them. There's nothing there that authorizes them to speak on legislation on behalf of the membership. So I'm a little bit concerned about how this message is getting out, because we had a discussion at the annual meeting, and really there was one person online who was really concerned about this, and I tried to address those concerns at the time. So I think this is the fear of the unknown, and I don't think that the farmers should have to have this undue process put on them. They're, extremely busy people, and to have to go out there and register something where they could just go out and be blowing it all through the air and it'll go wherever it is rather than target it. It just does not make sense to me to have a better technology and put something so onerous on them for no reason other than fear of the unknown, in my opinion.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You heard my earlier discussion of the amendment and that they be registered folks and so on. But I did have a different question for you, because I suspect you'd give the same answers we heard already about that issue. Here it says the 20 feet above ground level. That would be in the new statute. Would it be your understanding that a violation of that would be covered by 430.42?
I believe it would be. Again, I think that would be an administrative fine. Frankly, I don't know what we have in our rules.
$1,000.
Yeah.
Confiscation
So
of
that,
$1,000, yeah.
Yeah, that would be. I mean, that's going to be something that's frankly going to be very hard to prove. I also believe that most people, I mean, apple orchards will probably be closer to the 20 feet, but anything vegetable is going to be much lower than that. So, yeah, there is a fine in place if they're spraying higher. But all of this, in my 7+ years, not aware of any fines being issued for any of this.
If I could just may follow up quickly on that. Would it make sense to add to the bill a reference that violations of this provision are covered by 430.42, just to clarify that indeed that's your authority? So if somebody comes to you with a photographic or other evidence that something is above 20 feet, that they'd have a avenue for enforcement.
I don't think there's any harm in belts and suspenders in this case.
Thank you.
Senator.
So, thank you, Commissioner. I mean, I sort of asked this same question to Representative Aaron, but I think you being the division that enforces this, it might be a good question for you. Is it your belief that by lowering this to below 20 feet, that you're going to simulate, an equal or lesser drift as you would from certain ground applications that may occur?
I really believe it will be less drift, because when you're doing a spray upwards to try to cover more ground, you're actually intentionally causing drift, and you don't know where that drift is going to end. This, very targeted in spraying down, and obviously you cannot be operating a drone on a windy day. So I think that there is no question, at least not in my mind, and the people that I've talked to who have expertise in this, that there will be much less drift than what we are currently experiencing from ground spraying.
Follow? Would it also be reasonable to say that with the expense of the technology for the drone application equipment, it's probably most of this is going to be done by commercial operations and not so much by individual farmers themselves?
I think that is a fair statement. I will say that I think as time goes on, there'll probably be more farmers who will become more versed in this and may do it themselves. But again, they have to be licensed applicators, and they have to follow the instructions on the labels of the pesticides, regardless of how they are applying it. So, initially, it'll probably be more hired people, but I think as time goes on, you'll probably see people spraying with drones just as they do with their own orchard sprayers or field sprayers now. But in any case, they're going to have to be trained, and they're going to have to be licensed to do this. So,
see, you answered my last follow-up. Nice job. Thank you.
all right.
Senator Alshuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, for taking my question. I agree with you. It would be great if we all chatted with each other. But I think what I'm struggling with is why would we take away the compulsion to notify our neighbors if we're going to use something that could kill things on their land, potentially? So, for instance, I live in a very rural part of Stratham, and I actually live 4 doors down from an apple orchard that does use pesticides, and another half mile, I can see it from my house, is an organic farm. And so they have to have conversations with each other. And to take away the compulsion to, I'm going to be using something that could potentially kill something that you're growing on your property, I don't know, it seems to be a setup for conflict when a notification of I'm going to be doing my pesticides on, between this time and this time. I just wanted to let you know, to give people the opportunity to, either cover, move their hives, which is no small thing to do, because our family, we have members of our family that are beekeepers, and what a production it is to do anything with that. It just seems like that's a bare minimum that we can require, is that, let people know you're about to spray something that can kill something they're growing.
So the reality is there is zero notification in the state of New Hampshire right now. Zero. So to say that we're taking something away from anyone is not true, because anything from zero is still zero. And so what we would be doing probably through notification, I mean, maybe some farmers would do that. Some might just say, it's not worth the expense. Look at what is in statute for notification. We're just going to stay with the ground spraying, which is worse, and there is no notification. So I would answer it by saying, doing something that is less harmful, has less drift, is much better than staying with an old method which we know has drift.
Commissioner, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate your time. Representative Bixby.
Good afternoon, Representative Peter Bixby, Stratford 13, Dover, House Environment and Agriculture, and we had some interesting discussion about this bill. Representative Aaron covered it fairly thoroughly. I just wanted to make a couple of additional points. One is in terms of the notification and drift. From the testimony we heard, and also information we got from the Farm Bureau, there is less drift, much more accurate spraying, lower volume spraying with a drone than with a ground application. My feeling is that unless we have notification for ground spraying, we should not have notification for drones. And that may be a discussion that needs to happen at some point in terms of should we have notification for ground spraying? But that is not this bill. I think that might be a question for a future legislature. I think that what this bill does is it enables farmers to take advantage of a spraying technique that is safer than the existing ground spraying procedure, that is more targeted, that will result in lower use of pesticides, more targeted use of pesticides. Another thing that needs to be kept in mind is that no one can just send up a drone. You need to be licensed by the FAA in order to do anything with a drone, and that is not on your own property, and in some cases that is on your own property, the drones that would be used for this spraying need to be larger than the smallest drone size. So that's the cutoff is I think is 55 pounds. But given the fact that you're going to be carrying a substance up there that you're going to be spraying, it has to be more than that 55-pound limit. So this is a fairly large drone. So there's a higher level of FAA requirement in terms of your piloting license for that drone. You also need to have a flight plan filed with the FAA before you go up and spray. So there is not just the regulation that exists under the New Hampshire pesticides statutes. There is also the FAA oversight of the spraying operation, which means that it's much more likely that you're going to have a someone who does this as a commercial service as opposed to a farmer who would doesn't necessarily have time to invest in becoming licensed as a pilot as well as all the other things they're doing. So so that's another aspect. Another thing that needs to be considered is that the spray regulations that are in place currently for aerial spraying are a complete impediment to contractors who would want to come in and spray. They are not, the aerial spraying regulation, notification requirements are very onerous. They're designed for doing many, many acres, mostly of forest land. So if there is an amendment for notification, it needs to be much narrower and really targeted just for beekeepers. And there's the problem of getting a registry of beekeepers, which is, I'm not sure that the commissioner completely addressed it, but it really isn't there. So there's a voluntary sort of haphazard registry, but there's not really a good registry of beekeepers. So in terms of the mechanisms of notification, that would also be a challenge that would be put on the department in terms of how to make that possible. So I think that that is also a reason to leave the bill pretty much as it is, although I think that the suggestion in terms of making sure what the penalties for violation are, being clear, I think that would be an appropriate amendment. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative. Questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks.
I have Representative Linda Masmilla, not in support, not in opposing, not speaking. You're just here. Do you want to talk? I don't see her. Okay.
She may have been waiting for a seat. She was outside.
Okay. Yeah, she didn't describe whether she was supporting or opposing or if she wanted to speak or not. I like to give the representatives because they're usually really busy. So what I'm going to do is, no, Tom. I want to keep this moving. Tom Beaudry.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Beaudry from Walpole. I work as a crop advisor in New Hampshire, Vermont, a little bit in Massachusetts. I work with dairy farms. I deal only with forage crops. So I would like to speak on this from the side of forage crops. I'm not going to get into orchards. I was actually, myself, Tom Sawyer, who's behind me, he called me last August. Senator Pearl mentioned burr cucumber. Okay, burr cucumber is a tenacious weed. It's actually germinating right now, and it'll germinate all the way into the end of September. What happens is the cucumber will climb the corn plant, and typically when the corn is 10 to 12 feet tall and people want to go in and harvest, and it tents right over the top of it. And you can see fields where you have acre, 2 acre, 3 acres of this burr cucumber. Somebody goes in to chop it, they can't. It'll pull the other corn down. So right now, the way that it's controlled, okay, and it is sprayed in a lot of fields, is they'll go in with a self-propelled sprayer, call it a truck sprayer. It has 90-foot booms, okay? You're sitting there in a cab that you can just about see the top of the corn. Maybe you're going to see over the top of the corn. If you come into, say, a 25 or 30 acre field that has burr cucumber, you don't know where it is. So you spray the whole field, okay? And typically truck sprayers will spray 15 gallons, maybe even up to 20 gallons of liquid per acre, all right? So Tom Sawyer had contacted me and said, geez, I found a commercial operation in New York that would come in and spray the cucumber. I said, oh, that sounds good. And then I said, let's see if we can do it. So I got hold of David Rousseau, and David said, nope. Said our aerial rules go back to spraying the forest up in the North Country. Nothing for drone, they're over 20 years old. So we started on this bill with the help of Rob Johnson and others back in September. And we looked at it and we said, with a drone, okay, they can come in and they can see what's there to be sprayed. They're all using cameras. You get up there, you can see what needs to be sprayed, and then come in and spot spray those sections. That does multiple things for you. You're going to use less pesticide when you're done, okay? The other thing is you're not trying to, if you can imagine, I mean, people go to corn mazes and try to walk through corn that's 8 or 10 feet high. You're in a vehicle, corn's 10 feet tall, you're trying to stay on the rows, not run over corn. The platform that the driver's sitting on might be 4 or 5 feet tall, so that's going to lay some corn over. You're also running over corn on the end rows, and when you get done, you have lost some of your crop, okay? So we see this as a way to come in, clean up the cucumber so that the corn can be harvested and do very little damage to the corn. Using less herbicide than you're going to if you come in and spray the whole field. And I understand there's concerns with drift. I've heard that, and I've heard that from other people and from the beekeepers. Those of us in agriculture, we do not try to kill bees. We know that bees are very important for basically all of agriculture. For drift, drones are only going to fly not in a high wind situation because they can't. So that's going to reduce the potential for drift, but also there's adjuvants that are added to the spray material that will decrease the potential for drift as well.
Well said. Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, I appreciate your testimony.
You're welcome.
S. Robertson. S?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I just see an S with a period behind it. Sorry about that.
I don't have very good handwriting.
All right, sorry. Welcome.
Get that from his dad. My name's Cy. I milk cows with my family in Kentucook. We also raise forage crops to feed them. And I think most of what I want to say has been covered a lot, but I just want to point out that, you know, we deal specifically with bird cucumber in really significant ways. We have, in the past, run into it where we lose fully 2/3 of a field, you know, a 15-acre field, and we run over the corn because there's so much cucumber in it that you can't drive through it. So that's, and at that point, it's really hard to even get a spray rig through it. So that would be the biggest thing for us, is to be able to get in and knock that up and save a lot of our crop. And that would just be the biggest thing for me, just to highlight that we really would like to be able to use this technology. And I think that it's more the bill we're looking at, I think, is really more of a technology update than really changing regulations. You know, we're really looking at, like, the drones have been developed now and are at the point where we can use them to replace our tractors in some situations, and, you know, then we're decreasing fossil fuel usage because we can use electrical drones instead of fossil fuel tractors. I think that's
a good point.
But,
thank you. Further questions? Well done.
Thank you
very much. All right. Megan? there Megan in here? Nugent? What is that?
Which one are you looking at?
Right here.
Megan Murray, maybe?
Maggie May?
I'm not sure. Megan M.Y. looks like.
Yeah, M.Y. Megan Mai? Well, I'll just call on the next person. Robert Johnson.
He's definitely outside.
Have him bring in his guitar, please. Okay, Chuck.
He's up home.
Chuck, I'm gonna have Chuck.
I think Rob's coming.
Oh.
Yes.
All right. Robert Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Rob Johnson, representing the New Hampshire Farm Bureau as the Federation's policy director. And I apologize, I was able to catch a word or two out in the hallway here, so I really don't know much of what's been said, but I do have handouts, testimony for the committee.
Thank you.
And yes, Farm Bureau is a strongly in support of the bill, House Bill 1698. It was a bill that we worked on with the Department of Agriculture and the prime sponsor in drafting. I think it's important, if it already hasn't been said, that for anybody to use this technology, that they would be required to be a licensed applicator and also have their federal FFA license as well. We view it as simply providing another method of application that augments the current ground application. I think if I heard just at the very end, I caught where Mr. Robertson had said that we see it as it's a technology update. What I handed you, I should point out that I provided you with the 507 rule and also the statute, the existing statute with the bill incorporated. I sense that probably the one question, or you've heard out of why it has been asked of me, is notification. Just why can't we simply notify? And I guess the question with notification is the how to do so in a timely fashion. I don't, that's the big one. And it also, as I just previously said, this is an update in to technology. It's actually a more efficient, more targeted application of a crop protectant that has benefits for the soil, for the crop itself when it's driving over the roots. It's a time savings. And also, I don't know if it's been mentioned, but is a huge worker protection bonus here with the product being applied remotely, not where the worker is right there. So I know you've got a long day here, and I'll leave it at that and be open to any questions and ask you to read my testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Thank you very much. I'm going to lose a member at 4 o'clock, so we're just going to try to move this along if at all possible, to speed it up a little bit. Chuck? Southern.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you going to say anything? What's up, Chuck? Or anything?
Yeah.
Oh.
This is
Bruley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Chuck Souther. With my wife Diane, we own and operate Apple Hill Farm here in Concord. It's a diversified farm raising all sorts of tree fruits, small fruits, vegetables. So a little bit of sort of history here at Farmer Geek, if I will. It kind of scares me to say this, but I've been a licensed pesticide applicator for 50 years. It kind of scares me to say that, but anyhow, I have. And part of that process is continuing education. In order to get that license renewed, we have to attend seminars and learning things and all that. And a lot of what is drilled into us is sort of the basic requirements of what you have to do. What I've handed you is off from a couple of pesticide labels. One is sort of the standard thing that deals with drift, and the warnings that are on the label with that. And the bottom line is drift is illegal. It's against our state law. And the thing that's drilled into us at all of these seminars is that the label that comes on pesticide containers is the law. You have to follow the label. And on almost all of those, and you'll note I think I highlighted it, that it's against federal law to do something against what it says on this label. And every label that I've ever encountered has a whole section about drift. There's a lot of information on how to prevent it and all of that, and that's included there. With regards to bees, I also included one of the newer insecticides that is out, and I highlighted that, and I think on that. It talks about bees, and we talk about bees a lot. They're obviously very important to us, but on that label, it has a specific requirement right on there that you cannot apply this material anytime there are blooms or visiting bees. That restricts when you can do this, obviously, but there it is. It's on the label. The other thing I provided you is that, of course, we all work with UNH Cooperative Extension, and there's a series of small fruit, tree fruit, and vegetable management guides that go out. These are like an inch or an inch and a half thick, full of information. I just copied the page that has to do with bees and how to prevent damage to bees. So we're on top of this. It's great. But now to get a little bit further, as I said, I've been doing this for 50 years. Used a lot of different equipment, and things have changed. We've been fortunate here in New Hampshire to have an extension personnel that took on the task of learning how to help us calibrate our sprayers a whole lot better so we knew exactly what we were putting out. Part of that has been that there's a myriad of choices of nozzles that we can use on some of these sprayers that will help reduce drift. That's part of that whole calibration process. And a bunch of us have been going through that now and getting all of our sprayers calibrated. That's a great move. We've been pretty much endorsed that across the industry. I view this drones as sort of the next step, a better way to get more efficient, better way of doing it. We heard about the fuel savings, soil compaction, worker safety. Those are all the positive things that I view as this. And as a small business, we're constantly, we have to think about how are we going to get more efficient? How are we going to do this better? How are we going to do it less expensively? And that's how I view this. It's certainly sort of emerging technology, but I will tell you that all the trade magazines that I belong to and email groups and everything, the issue of drones has been right up there for the past year on how this is working, how it's done, the research that's being done on it. It is sort of the next step, if you will, in agriculture. And I would hope that you would support this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Robert Brule? Brule?
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Robert Brule. I work with the Division of Pesticide Control within the Department of Agriculture, Markets, and Food. I really don't have a whole lot to add. I think the commissioner and the speakers ahead of me have covered much of what I wanted to talk about. The way we see this, we're fully supportive, obviously, of this bill. It's going to be a great increase in efficiency for the farmers. Environmentally, as far as soil compaction and being able to get into fields, that's obviously going to be a big benefit as well. We see the drones being used not only as a pesticide application tool, but as a scouting tool. And we heard about how that's being done with burr cucumber, and I can visualize that being done in orchards as well. I work pretty heavily in the enforcement part of our division, and there were some questions earlier about could we enforce this bill using our existing statutes, and yes, certainly can. We don't have a lot of issues with farmers necessarily, but what I wanted to point out and reiterate is that the pesticide labels are the law. To violate them is a federal offense as well as a violation of state state administrative rules. We have a very robust enforcement program. The labels have protections on them for pollinators and bees. And we have any of our regulations relative to water protection and well protection obviously would still be in play. So the label, whether you're using a ground piece of equipment or an aerial piece of equipment, really there's no difference there. So I just wanted to be available if you had any questions specific to pesticides, because that's really where I come from.
Senator Pearl. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob, thanks for coming over. Good to see you again.
Yes, sir.
You know, we've heard an awful lot of discussion today about drift. How many complaints a year does the department get about drift issues where it's impacting neighboring properties?
We get very few from agriculture. We get many more drift complaints from commercial applications around residences. Say, for example, mosquito control or lawn applications, that type of thing. We occasionally get a drift complaint with agriculture, but oftentimes it may be a new neighbor to a farming operation that doesn't understand that the farmer's going to be out there at daybreak, doing his thing. And typically that involves a conversation where we play the middleman oftentimes between the applicator or the farmer and the neighbor. We talk about, maybe there is a way in which they can talk to each other and provide some information about when they may be spraying. So that educational part of it seems to go a long ways in helping resolve any type of situations like that.
Thank you, Bob.
Seeing no further, Senator Alshaw.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
So we are hearing a lot about the differentiation between truck spraying and spraying from a drone, right? But what this bill is asking for is not to conflate truck spraying with drone spraying, but to absolve drone spraying from the aerial notification law. So they're very well, like the discussion of which is a better way to apply pesticides is valid. However, this particular bill is about, do we have to notify our neighbors when we are spraying from 20 feet up? So there is no truck, tractor, piece of farm equipment that I am aware of. I am not a farmer, but I live in a farm area that is 20 feet high. And we're talking about starting at 20 feet and spraying down and out. So why wouldn't we apply the aerial requirements that we have for spraying other things from the top down to a drone, which is also aerial? It seems like, and forgive my ineloquence of this, but it seems like we're looking to create a new terminology. There's ground spray and there's air spray. And there's not, like, drones are still aerial. And this is a notification of aerial pesticide. Drones are still in the air. So I'm struggling to find where a drone is super special all of a sudden. It's cool. It is a really interesting and probably, as we are hearing, better way to apply pesticide. But nonetheless, it's still in the air. And so I'm struggling for why notifying your neighbors doesn't apply anymore or wouldn't.
Sure. Obviously, when these regulations were written, we didn't have drones, right? So
Right.
They were written with the concept, this is my
Thank you.
Understanding of what your question is. We did have aerial applications of pesticides historically for mosquito control and for hardwood suppression in conifer work up north. And those are done with rotary winged helicopter type aircraft or fixed wing aircraft. Much higher altitude, much larger quantities of product covering a much wider area. And so these drones, when I look at this bill, they're actually a subset of aerial applications. They're an unmanned aerial vehicle. And that's defined in statute too. So I do think that they're different. And I do think that the points brought out before about the limited amount of product and the precision that they can be applied would allow this to be a reasonable use of an agricultural operation without having to notify your neighbor, when you can go out with something that does create drift and you don't have to notify your neighbor. So that was my answer.
Thank you for your testimony. I still have a lot of people ready to have to speak and 2 more bills,
Okay.
so I'm going to try to move this along. And thank you for your testimony.
Absolutely.
Gerard? I'm going to have to leave for just to go and take a bill too. You have the floor.
A lot has been, Gerard Godwin from Bridgewater, a beekeeper. The notification with beekeepers in general, I think some years ago we tried to do it through the state, that they contacted the New Hampshire Beekeepers Association, therefore they would contact the local clubs who had, then they could contact people in that area. I think that's simple on that. My other question was herbicides. Is that going to be expanded to that? And then would the power companies be using these drones that don't need to do the notification for anybody?
That I don't know.
Okay, my question, I mean, I'm for the farmers and with the bees and all this and that, and I know with pollinators, I do not bring any of my hives, any of my colonies to do pollination. So I hope the farmers and the pollinators, they'll get, together and do that. But I just simply want to know that, how far is this going to go? If you don't need to notify anybody, you can come out and just start spraying. And I realize, I don't realize because I'm not a farmer, I'm a bee farmer, but, and that costs you between $155 and $300 to get bees if you use the colonies, and it takes years to build them back up. I'm also responsible for what's in my honey when I sell it, so I'd like to know on that. But what the farmer goes through, trying to make ends meet, I can't even understand that, and my whole heart's with them. But a simple, we have apps for everything. I'm not into that. But I would think it would be something, if you're going to come into an area and you're going to spray 5,000 acre farms, in that area, you could send out an app to somebody and then they can notify. With that, I respect you listening to me, and I hope it goes well. But
Well, thank you, and we appreciate your testimony.
thank you.
So, Fawn? Uh-oh, you broke it.
Sorry. Doing great, right?
I'm kidding. Welcome back.
Hi again. Thank you for having me, Chairman, Senators. So I am Fawn Gaudette. I am of New Hampshire Save Our Pollinators Coalition. We've been working on protecting our pollinators for years. And there's some key things when I try and do this really quick. That I oppose this bill and this amendment. Pesticides poison all biodiversity, including humans, animals, pollinators, and as New Hampshire lawmakers, I feel that it's your job to ensure the safety of New Hampshire children, people, farm workers, pollinators, and biodiversity. And I'd also like to share, in the past, we've worked on bills to try and save our pollinators. And there's one bill in the past where we had over 4,000 signatures in support of protecting our pollinators and trying to make safer ways for them to survive. This bill violates New Hampshire's person's right to know that, if they are being poisoned, their land, their family. And as this gentleman said, how would you know if it's going to be used in other ways on farms, if it moves on and it progresses in other ways? Like, the roadside ways, I agree with that. It's, people have a right to know. There's a danger to human beings, pollinators, and the environment. This breaks down the fragile homeostasis we all need to coexist. No part of New Hampshire's biodiversity should be poisoned. And I'd like to share that there are many groups that have gathered to protect our pollinators, so the beekeepers, New Hampshire Beekeepers Association, Beyond Pesticides, which is a national organization that's worked on protecting pollinators as well. Pesticides are poisons to humans and New Hampshire pollinators. There's much science. Just highlight it?
Yeah,
Okay,
we can
okay,
read
so
this
read that,
stuff.
all right.
Yeah.
So the key thing is that pesticides ultimately harm pollinators. They harm humans and our biodiversity. There's been many studies that I have in here that share that. Roundup has been found to cause cancer. So when you look up online, you can go ahead and look that up, how you're talking about spraying drones with pesticides. In the United States, that accounts to billions of pounds of pesticides. So if we start doing that, already adding to what we have, that's detrimental to our environment, it's detrimental to our biodiversity, and I don't think that it's healthy. And I just do want to share that the rusty patch bumblebee is believed to be locally extinct, and it's on the endangered species list. Therefore, we cannot calculate how much the pesticide drift is going to harm people. What is it going to do to the rest of our pollinators, and what are the harms to people as well? So going down to, I feel like, just so you know, other states in New England and the United States have already passed pollinator protections. 10. New Hampshire is behind on that. We are not moving forward. I think it's a pause. It'd be strong for us to move forward, to protect our pollinators instead of taking steps to move back. There are organic properties, organic things that we can do to protect our pesticides and our farming, and I think that's a healthier way to go than to continue adding to using chemicals in our system. And it doesn't matter what height we use pesticides, it has a devastating effect on our biodiversity. And going back to, we have a right to know also. People have the right to know if they're going to be poisoned. I would prefer not to have pesticides, but in the very least, people have the right to know if their environment, their families are going to be poisoned for future generations.
Thank you very much, Fawn. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. Questions? Seeing none. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Yeah, I just hold your papers down. Robert, and I don't know how, Robert, I think.
No idea right now, I'm sorry.
Never mind. You don't want to speak anyway. I'm sorry about that. I just can't read some of these writings. Joseph Mercier? There we go. I think you're our last speaker.
It's Joseph Mercieri.
Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. My name is Joseph Mercieri. I'm here with my wife Janice today. We are the owners of White Mountain Apiary and Bee Farm, a family business located in Whitefield, New Hampshire. We represent the second largest honeybee apiary in the state. We manage over 150 hives. Our hive products are currently in 27 retail markets throughout the state. We also supply hive products to over 20 small businesses who use our products as ingredients to manufacture their retail products. For the record, we are opposed to the notification exemption language contained within this bill. The success of our business is dependent upon the health of our livestock, our honeybees. 24 hours. That is the time it would take after the bees are exposed to a pesticide to die. Losing hives for a pesticide exposure involves much more than losing colonies of bees. It will represent a tremendous fiscal impact on our business. In terms of dollar loss, a beekeeper spends an average of $800 to $1,000 for a single beehive. These costs include hive boxes, frames, foundation, covers, husbandry costs, and the honeybees themselves, all of which can be quickly lost overnight. Losing hives also means losing our market share, our profits. We cannot make money with dead hives and cannot sell contaminated honey. And our losses are not short term. The issue is, unlike other businesses who can quickly recoup their losses and get back up and running in a short amount of time, it takes 2 years for a beehive to start producing optimal amounts of honey. That means enough honey to maintain a healthy hive, enough honey to get them through the winter months, and enough honey for us to harvest to sell. This proposed exemption would effectively delete 6 pages of current regulations found in the pesticide administrative rules. The exemption would eliminate the aerial special permit requirement. And by the way, all my hives are registered. There is a registry in this state, unlike what you were informed. If you will, give me a second. I'm holding in my hand a copy of the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture, Markets and Food webpage cover. And basically, one of the topics here, or frequently asked questions, is, do I need to register my apiary with the state of New Hampshire? And the answer is, apiary registration is voluntary in New Hampshire. We encourage beekeepers to register their apiaries for several reasons. The location and contact information can be provided to licensed applicators applying pesticides under special permits. Applying pesticides using unmanned aerial aircraft, anything up in the air, right, according to the current rules, requires a special permit. Therefore, we should be notified. Here's the form that they provided to me to register my apiaries, which I did. So to find out that there is no registration kind of was a big surprise to me, and I'm kind of wondering, where did my form go? Where is it? In the office building, and if they ever did use it. Let me get back to my other comments. Okay. The exemption would eliminate the aerial special permit requirement. It would eliminate the current public notice and the written notification requirements. It would eliminate the public's right to submit comments during a 15-day period afforded by the current rules. The exemption would nullify any notification to a town select board, as well as any beekeeper who has registered their hives with the state. The exemption would also relinquish persons flying the drone while spraying pesticide from any liability caused from the lack of notifications. Currently, the State Fish and Game Department has a program which would help offset the cost to beekeepers who lose their hives from damages from bears. My question is, if this exemption, which nullifies the current notification process, were to be made law, is the State Department of Agriculture prepared to reimburse beekeepers who lose hives due to pesticide poisoning from spraying applications that would have previously required notification? Are you prepared to reimburse us for our losses? The notification contained in HB 1698 FM eliminates the beekeeper's right to know and places them in an untenable position. Simply ask you, why would a law like this be endorsed by our legislators? We suggest that you consider throttling back on this bill and take another approach. That being modifying current administrative rules to address drone spraying operations. The current special permit process is not user-friendly and it is time-consuming. Perhaps you may consider streamlining the notification process for drone applications. You might also want to consider enhancing the beekeeper hive registration program. We looked online for the list of registered apiaries or a map of their locations, neither of which could be found. Question is, how is a pesticide applicator supposed to know where the hives are located if they cannot access the information? You may want to consider offering an online map depicting registered hive locations, each location having a pop-up to provide owner's name and contact information. You can go even further and provide an email link to the apiary owner so they can get notification. You talked about drift. There was a lot of talk about drift. Everyone was concerned about drift. Yes, there are some concerns about drift. But I think we kind of forget that honeybees, they fly. They travel. Honeybees normally forage a radius of anywhere from 3 to 5 miles away from the hive. I can't put a leash on all my honeybees and keep them in the apiary and prevent them from just going 200 feet. That just isn't going to work. What works is giving me notification of your intent to spray and affording me enough time to go out to my apiaries and take the time to close them all up at night to prevent them from flying during application and after application when the extended residual time has expired. Because pesticides are lethal while they're being sprayed, and then there's a time frame as to when that goes away. They call it the extended toxicity time. Let me know. Let me know. Is it an hour? Is it a day? Is it 2 days? That's all I want to know. I'm not here to say, I want you to use drone technology. I understand the importance of lowering the use of pesticides, integrating technology into agriculture. I'm all for it, right? I'm all for pinpoint accuracy when it comes to spraying. But I'll tell you, if it wasn't for my bees flying, I wouldn't be here. Because basically, I can't prevent them from visiting the area that was just sprayed. And who knows? Maybe they're looking for forage in the surrounding area. Maybe the sparkle of the liquid attracts them because they also look for moisture. And they like to bring water back to the hives. And that's another problem. Once I have contaminated bees coming back to the hives, I'm going to lose the entire hive. So I think we need to work on a collaborative effort to resolving these issues and not yank the carpet out from under our business to only leave us hanging without any consideration for our fiscal interests or to help preserve my family business. In closing, all we want is to be informed. We want a phone call. That's all we're asking for. A notification of the intent to spray. Is that too much to ask? How much legislation will that take? This will give us the time to secure our hives and to keep the bees safe during the spraying application, as well as during the time that both the pesticide residual and extended residual toxicities remain active in killing pests. Notification provides a win-win for all interested parties. Thank you for your time. I'll answer any questions you may have.
Well, I'm running out of time because I still have 2 more
No problem.
Hearings, and they're going to be pretty extensive. So I appreciate your testimony.
You're welcome.
Mary Ellen, I think you are definitely our last speaker.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Could we ask the,
I'd rather not, because I got
Mr.
2
Mercieri to leave his testimony?
Yeah, of course.
Yes,
Would you leave that with our,
Yeah.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
I just wanted to, I got to move this along because I'm not being fair to the other people. Mary Ellen? Mary Ellen, you'll have to be our last speaker, and, yeah. I have 2 other bills, and they're going to be pretty extensive, so.
I'm not really sure that I can add to what Joe just told you.
Okay.
My
Like your
name's-
hat.
Thank you. I took it off. I didn't want to be disrespectful.
No, you're not.
I want you to know I was elected at the end of March. So I am trying to catch up. So please bear with me if I'm nervous and don't speak well. I wanted to say that I was disappointed with the testimony from our commissioner because I was there at that meeting. I know that people brought up HB 1698, and he did not address their concerns. So his saying that he didn't see any pushback is not true. And that was the day of the snowstorm. So those people felt it was necessary to get out and get to Manchester for his testimony. On April 11th, 2024, that would have been after our meeting that the commissioner attended, the NHBA Executive Board, comprising of the presidents of all 9 regional clubs and the NHBA executive officers, voted unanimously to oppose HB 1698. The consequences of pesticide exposure to our bees is too dire for us to stand back and allow you to take our right of notification away. This bill seems to depend on the false belief that drift is the only concern we as beekeepers have. Drift is only one of our concerns with this issue. Currently, aerial application of pesticides requires notification of spraying. This bill wants to eliminate that requirement, thus preventing us from adequately protecting our colonies. I want to be clear. The only way we can protect our bees is to sequester them for the time that it takes for the pesticide to become inert, or to move the colonies altogether from the area. If bees are allowed to be out foraging while the spraying is happening, it will kill the foragers. It does not matter from what height that spraying occurs. Those bees lucky enough to survive and make it back to the colony bring the poison back to the hive. Bees are highly social, and that behavior is their downfall. They will pass that pesticide from bee to bee, causing the poisoning of the entire colony. Pesticides are absorbed into the wax, so the beekeepers can't even reuse those combs. And it literally takes 2 years to develop a functioning hive that will produce enough honey for production. We fear the consequences of eliminating the requirements as drone technology advances. Is it too crazy to think that pest companies could replace their workforce with drones? Just swoop into my next door neighbor's place and spray indiscriminately? This is my question for all of you and for the promoters of this bill, is who benefits from not notifying beekeepers and the public? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. All right, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill. Oh, Senator.
I had signed up.
You did. All right, come on up. Sure, we'll get you in. My apologies. There's a long list here.
On the first page.
All right.
Then, go ahead. My name's Sheldon Sawyer. I'm a dairy farmer from Walpole, New Hampshire. I was actually probably the reason that it got started, because I did try and use drone spraying last year, and it was going to be too complicated. Couldn't get done. Anyway, one of the problems with notifications that I have is I probably have 50 abutters. And how do I go about notifying them? Is it okay to just say, hey, I'm going to be spraying? If you have to send, I believe in the aerial application rules now, I think you have to send a registered letter. And how would you get the addresses, just for everything? Things like that. The spraying, and drone application for forage crops is down, similar to, and it's, like I say, it's 20 feet maximum, but a lot of the times it would be lower. So if you're spraying when it's lower, it's really no different than ground application. I mean, the acceptor is using less pesticides than a regular. They use a lot less water for the amount of acres they do. I know that it's used heavily in New York and Pennsylvania, because that's the person that I talked to, and they've had very little problems. Can't think of any. The notification would be very problematic to get it done. And if there was a notification, maybe bee people could come to farms. When if you want to be on the list, there is. I mean, yes, there is a list. It's a voluntary list, so what does that really, I mean, we can put it on a website that, hey, we might be spraying tomorrow, and it's a window, because depending, we might be spraying in the next 2 or 3 days, but you don't know. It depends on weather, it depends on when they can get there, too. That's just all I have.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Is there anybody else who's on the list that we missed? I certainly don't want to do that. All right, well, seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 1698. Thank you all. All right, we will, is Rep. Rochefort here? Do you see Rep. Rochefort?
Yeah, he's right in the hallway.
Yes, can you send him in?
Can you get Representative Rochefort? Representative Rochefort?
As soon as he comes in, we will open the hearing on House Bill 1632. Rep. Rochefort, come on up. Yeah, just put it in. Yeah. All right, we're going to open the hearing on House Bill 1632, and we'll recognize Representative Rochefort to introduce the bill.
Yes, thank you,
Good
Mr.
afternoon.
Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Rochefort. I'm represent Grafton 1 in Littleton. And before you, we have HB 1632. And this is a bill actually that came directly out of the study committee that convened over the summer from Senate Bill 159. And the purpose of that committee was to study unlimited surface area permits for landfills and out-of-state waste coming into New Hampshire. And we looked at a number of factors that are contributing to landfills as well as out-of-state trash. I know I was here a couple weeks ago with one of those recommendations that was not necessarily agreed upon by all of the committee, but today 1632 is one that had unanimous support amongst the committee members over the summer. And it's very simple. It limits for newly permitted landfills, it limits the amount of out-of-state trash to 15%. Currently, as we all know, up to 50% of the garbage put into our ground in New Hampshire comes from out of state. And this is being done that way because many states around us have banned certain things, put limitations on certain things, and New Hampshire hasn't. So as a result, we've become a dumping ground for our neighbors. In fact, just this morning on the way down here, I counted 12 trash trucks headed north. And I stopped counting around Canterbury on the way south. So it's a problem. It's a continual problem. The problem, I say the problem is the risk of filling up our landfills and contributing to potential pollution. Now, one of the concerns that we've heard about, and I know that you've heard about it here in the Senate, is when we start limiting things from out of state. There's a concern, there's always been discussion about that's a violation of the Commerce Clause. So one of the people that we had come in was from the Attorney General's office, and we asked them, why there are some industries, there are some cases in New Hampshire where there is a difference for out-of-state activity versus in-state activity. I think those of us that hunt and fish realize that out-of-state people are charged more for their hunting and fishing license than in-state residents. In my profession as a pharmacy, we charge more for out-of-state pharmacies to be registered in the state of New Hampshire than in-state pharmacies. So there is that disparity there. So when we asked the Attorney General about that, they said really there's no prohibition of restricting out-of-state trash or limiting out-of-state trash. It's really, there has to be a balancing act. So we have to show that there is there's benefit to the state by doing so. And the information that I just handed out to you discusses that. This is an interagency memorandum from the Attorney General's office to DES. It's dated December 21st, or excuse me, December 14th, 2021. And in particular, on page 2 and 3, it talks about the balancing act that has to take place. So so he gave us 3 criteria, which are listed in this memo that I gave you. And in speaking with folks from DES when they came before the committee, they very easily said that at least the first 2 very easily could be met. There's much benefit. There's a greater benefit to the state than out-of-state folks by putting certain limitations on non-resident trash. The third recommendation, he alluded to the fact that may have to be settled in court, but we understand that will, regardless of what happens, this probably will be tested in court. This came out of, just a little background, this came out of the House unanimously, came on consent. When we had this same hearing in the House, 500 plus folks signed in support, 7 people signed in opposition. In speaking with my constituents and folks around the state, people are really surprised when they realize that half the trash that we're putting in our ground and potentially with potential environmental issues doesn't even generate, is not even generated from here. So that's the background of the bill. I know I've got a lot of people here that have been here waiting to testify on this that are going to get into more of the science aspect of things and that, but that's the background of the bill, and that's how this thing generated.
Thank you, Representative, for your testimony. Any questions? All right, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rep. Germana?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is Nick Germana. I am a representative from Keene, from Cheshire District 1. And I'll keep this very short because I know we've got a lot more to do. I just will emphasize 2 points. Number 1 is we are behind our solid waste management goals, and we are getting further behind as the years go by. By the middle of this century, we are going to be more than 50% off our waste reduction goals. And our very first priority is waste reduction. And as I said, we're going to miss that target by more than 50% by the middle of this century. The only way we are going to make a significant impact, not the only way, but one of the most important ways we'll make a significant impact is by reducing the amount of out-of-state waste we take, which is nearly 50% at this point. So that's the first point. We have to do this in some way, shape, or form. The second is I just want to point out that this is not going to, despite some things that we've heard about landfill bills and we'll likely hear later, this is not going to result in an increase in capacity need and therefore an increase in costs. Right now, we're talking about all future landfills. This doesn't affect current landfills and it doesn't affect expansions to landfills. It affects future landfills. We have capacity now through at least 2034 based on permitting capacity that the DES has quantified. And again, there's capacity for some expansions. A week or 2 ago before this committee, Waste Management talked about the high likelihood that they would look to expand in turnkey. So again, we are not, whatever gets said after this, this is not going to result in a decrease of capacity and an increase in cost because our capacity for the next decade is known. And even beyond that with expansions, we will be not in a position of increased capacity. So those are the 2 points I wanted to make.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Rep. Potenza. And I appreciate all of you moving through this. We do have a lot to go, and I just ask that you keep your comments as brief as you can. I want to give you the opportunity to make your points, but just
I'm going to be so brief. It's going to be like 3 sentences. So I strongly support this bill. There were many initiatives in a sense that we brought forward. We were told from that study committee that Senator Avard was on in regards with out-of-state waste, and this is one of the solutions that came, a bill that came from that. So I think that previous speakers said everything that needed to be said, and I just strongly support it, so.
Thank you. Rep. Aaron, you have a maybe down. Do you want to exercise that maybe? Sure. All right.
Thank you again, Representative Judy Aaron, representing Sullivan County District 4, the towns of Ackworth, Goshen, Langdon, Leominster, and Washington, and Chair of Environment and Agriculture in the House. I'm here today to strongly support this bill. If it is with the legislature's intention to set policy to restrict out-of-state trash, I think this is a good way to do it, especially within the confines of the Commerce Clause. I think that it makes good sense to, going forward, put restrictions on how much out-of-state trash that we receive in landfill. And I totally understand that, you know, within the hierarchy of how we deal with solid waste, that landfilling is the very last resort in terms of, you know, what we're going to do with it, whether we recycle, reuse, incinerate, whatever, that the very last thing is that what we're putting into our landfills. And I think it makes more sense to restrict what we're taking from out-of-state trash and take care of our residents, citizens in New Hampshire, their trash first.
Thank you, Representative.
Yep.
Questions? All right, seeing
Okay,
none.
thank you.
Rep. Haskins, did you want to speak?
Yes.
Okay, you didn't check off the speakings, but I will get
sorry.
you on.
For the record, Linda Haskins, Rockingham 11, Exeter. I'll be brief as well. In support of 1632, the state of New Hampshire has a flashing red alarm facing us that demands our immediate attention. When the full House passed HB 1632 with a bipartisan vote, the state was just waking up to the dangers of PFAS contamination. Landfills are a primary source of PFAS in leachate that emanates from all landfills. Despite the Department of Environmental Services' stated goal in 2022 to reduce solid waste by 25%, we have not yet achieved 3% of that goal as we sit here today. Certainly the first place to look in achieving this goal is to reduce out-of-state waste. Why should Massachusetts meet their environmental goals on the backs of New Hampshire citizens? Why should industry benefit from tipping fees that are accepting out-of-state waste that do not go back to the taxpayers of New Hampshire? Mistakes have been made in holding industry to the highest standards of safety in Merrimack, in Hampton, and elsewhere in the state. We cannot go back, but we must not continue to put the safety of our citizens at risk in order to line the pockets of a billion-dollar industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony. We appreciate it. I believe I've got all the representatives now. Nancy Morrison. Oh, did we have one more? Did you want to speak? Yes. Come on up. I'm sorry. My apologies.
No problem.
Oh, sorry, Massimilla, you didn't check the yes or no either, and I went right by. That's okay. Come on up. No judgment here.
Thank you. I'm Representative Linda Massimilla. I represent Grafton 1, and I just wanted to comment. I think this measure is something that we can call preventive management as opposed to crisis management. We're not to that point yet, but we are heading that way. New Hampshire is looking at becoming a target state as Connecticut and New York and Massachusetts. Some of them have already closed landfills, some of them are in the process, and it makes sense that they would look to New Hampshire because we're closest in proximity as opposed to going out to the western Midwest section. And I think this is a bill that needs to be considered carefully and to be passed because it makes sense now as opposed to critical management later on. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
Any questions? I know I can't been skipping that. All right, Nancy Morrison. Thank you for coming in today.
I'm sorry?
I said thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for still being here. You could have left. You could have just walked out at this point.
Well,
I bet you were tempted.
We do our best to make sure everybody's voice is heard.
Thank you so much for listening to me today. Senator Pearl, Senator Waters, and Senator Altshuler. I have a very short testimony. I'm not going to read it all. I will pass it out to you, but I just want to make a couple points. I hope we never need House Bill 1632, as it applies only to new landfills. But I do hope you vote it ought to pass. At least 3 gubernatorial candidates from both sides of the aisle say that a new landfill in New Hampshire makes no sense at this time. If, however, a new landfill was ever needed in the future, House Bill 1632 would help stop the flow and unbalanced amount of state trash flowing into our state. New Hampshire exports about 5% of its trash for recycling and disposal, and between 2015 and 2019, New Hampshire imported 47% of its landfill trash from out of state, mostly Massachusetts. This extreme inequity places an undue burden on New Hampshire's land, air, and water, and the people that did not produce the trash. My last point. The recently updated EPA standards for drinking water with PFAS in it is now at 4 parts per trillion. The cost to achieve this at our wastewater treatment facilities will be substantial. If New Hampshire continues the alarming trend of importing an inordinate amount of out-of-state trash into a new landfill, the cost of removing PFAS from the hundreds of millions of gallons of toxic leachate created from out-of-state trash will be head-spinning, and no doubt passed on to businesses and taxpayers, as Governor Sununu has indicated it may. My last question or comment: what does New Hampshire do with the PFAS once it has been treated or removed from the leachate? Where does it go? I ask you to please pass House Bill 1632 to stop the insidious flow of out-of-state trash and its environmental health and safety repercussions impacting New Hampshire citizens and businesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrew Preventure.
Thank you, Senator and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on behalf of North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. Wayne Morrison isn't able to attend, but we sent along electronic copy of his testimony. Just wanted to, in the instance of time, be pretty brief on a couple items. The first is that we see the state and the legislature as determining value judgments often. And one of those value judgments is our relation between economic activity and our environment. And when we look at this bill, we support the bill. We do want to throw out a concept. We have a 15% right now. I know I've already heard talk about folks saying maybe that 15% needs to go to 20 or 25. And I'd like to put the counter, perhaps it needs to go below that 15%. Right now, New Hampshire is sending out between 3 and 5% of its waste. We are importing near 50%. One potential would be to look at maybe a 5-year rolling average and have that set the ceiling. Additionally, we want to make mention to what I see as a potential loophole in the legislation. That is, we've seen in the past in our neighboring community of Maine, a operator who had trash brought in, processed it at a facility, and then sent it to a landfill in order to evade what would be out-of-state waste. So our recommendation would be to change the line that says, shall not accept any more than 15% of solid waste transported from out of state, and change that line to shall not accept any more than 15% of solid waste that originates or is collected in the state other than New Hampshire. I think the intention of the bill is not to have waste brought in, processed, and then delivered into a landfill, but to prevent the out-of-state waste itself at that level. Sure. Yep. The current line reads, shall not accept any more than 15% of solid waste transported from out of state. And we would suggest the revision be, shall not accept any more than 15% of solid waste that originates or is collected in a state other than New Hampshire. I'm more than happy to take any questions on any of those items. The only other item I would like to mention is we are talking about the importation of a substance that has real and tangible impacts on our communities. We're not talking about importing Maine lobster or Boston baked beans. This is toxic waste and trash. And there are value judgments that the legislature can do to better align with what the state's value judgments have been in regards to curbing this type of trash.
Thank you. Further questions? All right, seeing none, we appreciate it. Muriel Robinet, did I get it right?
Thank you. I'm Muriel Robinette. I've been an environmental consultant in the state for more than 40 years, licensed professional geologist. I'm here representing North Country ABC. I'm here to talk to you about the environmental issues of solid waste, and you've probably heard a lot about that. The whole point of limiting the amount of solid waste we put in landfills is an important key issue, because solid waste, as we know, contains the forever chemicals of PFAS. And so why should the citizens of New Hampshire be happy to receive solid waste that comes from out of state that they didn't end up generating? Because that is going to be a source of contamination to the state for the better part of 100 years. The other issue about solid waste is the fact that it doesn't stay in one place because it creates leachate, and leachate has to be dealt with. And in our state, we truck leachate all over the state and dump it into municipal solid waste facilities, municipal treatment plants. These treatment plants currently do not treat for PFAS. They don't have the ability to treat for it yet. We also don't even have EPA standards for surface water quality. And yet these rivers that are receiving the so-called treated leachate serve as drinking water sources. So from an environmental standpoint, from a train coming through the tunnel, this is going to be a big issue for New Hampshire if we continue to just put our untreated leachate into drinking water, rivers that are used as drinking water. A substantial concern for the state and the municipalities in the state. A good reason to limit the amount of solid waste that we're putting in the ground. It was an interesting part of the testimony that one of your people spoke about seeing 12 waste trucks moving on the highways. New Hampshire citizens are dealing with increased truck traffic, increased tanker trucks because of having to address transportation. This is coming hundreds of miles. And we know that trucks create emissions, diesel emissions, particulates in the air. And so therefore, New Hampshire citizens are exposed to additional air quality questions because of moving of this out-of-state waste and out-of-state leachate. So I think the bottom line is the state has a desire to reduce the amount of landfill waste. It has a solid waste plan, and yet it's going to take some leadership to effectuate that, because otherwise having landfills and disposing of waste in the ground is a big business. And so this type of bill, as well as others that you've been hearing, are steps that potentially you can be taking to show leadership to reduce the amount of solid waste that comes into the state of New Hampshire for disposal. Thank you.
Great testimony. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. All right, and so Sarah? We taking like 6 bills. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Sarah Uhas Kern, and I serve as the Assistant Director of the Waste Management Division at the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. The department is not taking a position on House Bill 1632, but I do have a concern that I'd like to share with you. I'll keep it super quick. We understand that the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution is commonly interpreted to prevent a state from prohibiting or restricting commercial solid waste facilities from accepting or disposing of out-of-state solid waste. If enacted, we're concerned that the provisions of the bill would subject DES solid waste permit decisions to legal challenges based on the Commerce Clause. That's a quick summary of our concern, and I'm happy to answer questions that you may have.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I assume you've seen the memo that was from the attorney, and you think that despite the memo, you still have some concerns about it?
Based on our discussions at DES and our discussions with DOJ, we do.
If I may.
Yeah, follow
Does DES have any concerns about legal action regarding the permit on or after the effective date? How that might apply to a facility that is currently in the process of permitting?
I can't make any comments on any applications that we have in-house and are currently reviewing.
If I may ask another one,
Follow up?
Mr. Chairman. So let's say that it's true that by 2034 we're reaching some capacity limits, no expansions or whatever. And those facilities are still continue to take what they want. It's around 50% now, but that will continue. And so when we got to 2034, noting that we have House Bill 1145 to come up, the implication is that that facility permitted after 2034 or before, but anyhow, at some point by the state would be subject to this. And if that were the case, do you think there'd be any particular challenges to the state-run facility that could only take 15% to be economically viable?
Not sure it's appropriate for me to comment on this bill, assuming that another one will pass.
Well, I know, but I'll ask you when we're talking about that one, all right? But I mean, I see why the question. If the state's going to be doing this, and the state's going to be the first one to be subject to this, what are their concerns about the economics? So your fiscal note does address some of the economic questions. So the department is on the record of saying there's a question marks around it.
Yeah, as you'll see in our letter of testimony, which I was trying to keep my comments brief for you all. We are not sure what the economic impact of this bill, if it were to pass, would be. There's a possibility that it would not have an impact or reduce the cost of solid waste disposal in the state. It's also possible that by preventing facilities from taking more than 15% out of state waste, that would change the operational costs of the facilities, and that could drive up the cost of disposal of solid waste in the state. So it is a question mark for us.
And thank you. And I just to comment. I mean, this is an interesting bill, and I hope that we'll be able to support it. But what I wonder about is under the conditions combining this with 1145, that it would not be feasible for the state to find somebody who could make an investment in a landfill under these conditions, and then we'd be kind of in tough shape. But thank you. We'll have opportunities to think about it.
I look forward to talking to you about 1145 as well.
Senator Pearl.
Thank you. I do have one quick question. So talking about the Interstate Commerce Clause, is the problem the number 15%, or is the problem related to any number being in there? Is there any quantity that could be there that you feel would not be a problem for the Interstate Commerce Clause?
Our understanding is that any restriction that would be placed would be a problem. And that's a restriction on commercial solid waste facilities. So if it was a publicly owned facility, the publicly owned facility could determine if it would take out of state waste and how much.
Okay, thank you.
No further questions. Thank you very much,
Thank
sir.
you.
Appreciate it. And I believe Kirsten from the BIA is our last speaker. Wow, you went through a lot of names already. Pretty good. Thank you.
I've got about 5, maybe 10 minutes tops.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for your patience today. For the record, my name is Kirsten Koch, Vice President of Public Policy for BIA. I have written testimony, and DES covered a lot of what I was going to say, so I'll be really brief. BIA also has concerns that this challenges the Constitutional Commerce Clause. I think that there are some questions as to, the sponsor mentioned the balancing act and the requirements and not meeting them all. So we do believe that there's a constitutional violation here. I think that the study committee recommended this bill, and knowing that it's unconstitutional, that's concerning and bad public policy. Something else I want the committee to consider is that if this bill passes and is subject to a legal challenge, which it very likely will be because it harms business, that litigation would subject the defendant, so in this case the state, to paying the attorney's fee award. That's a costly burden for taxpayers simply because the state knowingly passed an unconstitutional bill. So just another unintended consequence of passing this legislation. So ultimately, BIA is strongly opposed to this bill, and we ask the committee not to pass it. Thank you. I'd be happy to take any questions.
No, that was enough. Thank you, Senator Waters.
Thank you. So, same question I asked before. You're aware of the memo from the Attorney General?
I have not seen the memo
Okay.
before. No.
Please take a look. And have your attorneys look at it, because it's pretty clear that what it argues about whether taking this approach does seem to be constitutional. But, that's why God created lawyers, so they can litigate. But, I don't know why. Maybe the state need representatives. I don't know. But anyways, just take a look.
There is a movie called Devil's Advocate.
It would be interesting to see how the BIA interprets this. Okay.
Well, thank you for that, Senator.
Yeah.
I will say in my preparation, I had spoke to many lawyers within our membership, and I think, like DES, our concerns regarding the constitutionality remain.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that we took away from the study, though, is that other states are finding ways to restrict certain types of, a certain amount, and so we're just trying to figure out a process, and it might not be this way, maybe we can amend it in a certain way, but they're doing it, and we're not, and so that was just one of the concerns, and so that's not your burden, but that's why we did come up with this and throw it out there, and hopefully something will stick so that we can at least reduce our intake. But I am still a strong supporter of incineration, where we can reduce the tonnage by 2/3. Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
And we're going to close the hearing on 1632 FN and open up the hearing, unless you need a break. You need like a 2-minute break, or are you all set to keep going?
I got you some crackers with you.
Oh, he's got crackers. Nice.
I
Excellent.
unfortunately have to run. I got a child pickup duty here.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
And Howard, can I walk out with you for a second?
So it's just me?
Okay. I'm just gonna be a couple
You
minutes.
gotta
You sure you
clear
don't
a
wanna
room,
listen?
I would love to, but
Representative Bixby, you have the floor. We're going to open up the hearing till 11:45.
Okay, for the record, Representative Peter Bixby, Stratford 13, Dover, prime sponsor of this bill. And one of a lot of what's said about the reasoning for why this bill is necessary was also said for the previous bill. So 50% of the trash coming to New Hampshire is from out of state, and there are, the Interstate Commerce Clause does create restraints, whether if we accept the reasoning from the previous bill, then we could limit but certainly not eliminate out-of-state waste. And what 1145 does is propose that any future landfill be publicly owned, whether by the state or by a subdivision thereof, like a county or a town or city. And when it is publicly owned, then the jurisdiction that owns it has pretty much complete control over what goes into it, because they are not putting a limit on commerce, they are dealing with what they are doing themselves. Similarly, a privately owned landfill could refuse to take waste from out of state as well. It's what the owner of a landfill chooses to put into the landfill is pretty much up to that owner, as long as it meets environmental restrictions. One of the aspects of this bill is that if it is owned by the state, then it would have to be managed by a private company, and that is if it's owned by a county or by a municipality, then they would have the choice of running it themselves or contracting it. The model of a publicly owned landfill being managed by a private company is well established. This is the way that all the landfills in Maine operate. Casella has been operating the landfill at Juniper Ridge for many years under a 30-year contract, and is now working with the state of Maine to extend that contract well into the future. This bill does have a grandfather clause that excludes existing landfills and renewals of permits at existing landfills from this prohibition. So it would not have any impact on any currently operating public landfill, private landfill. I believe that permits that are filed with DES are judged under rules that are in effect at the time of filing. So this bill, I don't think this bill would affect any permit being currently considered. That would probably be a question for a lawyer who is more advanced in a law degree than I am. That is at least some amount of law training. This bill establishes a principle, but it doesn't set out the details of how to implement it. Because the need for a new landfill is years into the future, it doesn't make sense to flesh out the implementation details at this time. We did, however, put in a provision that would require that any contract that would thoroughly address the issue of liability in case of leaks or other mishap at the site. When the time comes to open a new landfill, the state would ideally choose a location that would optimize transportation from population centers, use land that has appropriate underlying geology, and minimize impact on potential neighbors. This legislature would be in control of directing DES to initiate the siting process, would control the capital funding for any necessary land purchases, and would create the guidelines under which DES would request proposals and write contracts with potential operators. So that's something that is basically, it would be in this legislature's powers to do everything necessary to make it happen if there was a decision that it was needed. Importantly, we'd be able to specify how much, if any, out-of-state trash would be accepted, and that could be zero. We could create guidelines about specific types that could be excluded, and we could create differential tipping fees for in-state and out-of-state trash, which are all things that could not be done under the Commerce Clause, regarding the one aspect that is feasible under the previously heard bill. In short, HB 1145 would allow New Hampshire to control what and how much trash comes in from out of state. By reducing the amount of out-of-state trash, we can reduce the number of new landfills that would be needed, allow them to operate longer, and reduce their environmental impact. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Well, if the state owned the landfills and there was a leak, and it cause some damage. Who is responsible for the mismanagement of that?
That would be something that would be specified in the contract that the state made with the operator. And if the language mirrored the language that the state of Maine has with Casella, then at their Juniper Ridge facility, Casella would be, the operator would be entirely responsible and the state would not have the liability.
I see. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chairwoman Aaron, would you care to talk about this a little bit?
Sure, thank you. And for the record again, Representative Judy Aaron, representing Sullivan County District 4, the towns of Ackworth, Goshen, Langdon, Leominster, and Washington. And I'm also chair of Environment and Agriculture Committee in the House. So for House Bill 1145, this is a bill that I personally voted against, and I am against, simply because, well, there's a couple of different reasons. Number one, I just find it very anathema to ban the private ownership of anything in our state. We have 2 privately owned landfills, and we have 4 publicly owned landfills currently. And the fact that this is grandfathered in, as well as the greater possibility that a current permit would not fall under the auspices of this legislation, means that we're really not doing anything in terms of dealing with out-of-state trash. And I just find that there's a lot of unanswered questions regarding if the state or subdivisions are the ones that are the entities that would be owning landfills. I have a question about how they would acquire the land, if there would be a lot of eminent domain issues arising from this kind of thing. Would we be taking land away from people as a result? And also, I just, I'm not so sure how, I guess the devil would be really in the details of the contracts between the state or political subdivisions and how they would come up with contracts that would safeguard everybody's interests involved, and as well as liability to the state if there's a leak or if there's an issue with the landfill, how much of that liability would be borne by New Hampshire taxpayers. And I'm just really concerned about a lot of aspects of this bill, so I don't agree with it.
Thank you for your testimony, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Questions? Seeing none.
Thank you.
Representative Potenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Representative Kelly Potenza, Stratford District 19, Rochester Wards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. I'm going to read first my testimony on the House floor that I made in support of HB 1145. And this is basically kind of a lot of the arguments that were against this, and I think it all really has to do with need. And that's never been in, for whatever reason, it's never been in the rhetoric. So all of the Republican talking points against this was that we can't stifle private businesses. So I want to remind, I wanted to remind everybody about a bill that came through about us wanting to ban China for purchasing land in New Hampshire. So right now, we could have a brand new Beijing-based state-of-the-art solid waste company come into New Hampshire and buy up all available property. Then they simultaneously can put in 10 applications to build massive landfills that have a 30-plus year life. So right now, in New Hampshire, there is nothing stopping them from doing so because DES only reviews applications and approves them based upon rules, not need. Last year, DES told a group of legislators, and I was there, and concerned New Hampshire citizens in a meeting that their job is to get the permit applicants to a yes. That was concerning for us all to hear. I said, let me remind this body that even after St. Gobain polluted the drinking water for an entire region, in southern New Hampshire, DES approved another permit before the company decided to close up shop. We were told it was approved because they can't look at, quote, unrelated items outside of the application in front of them. Our landfill permitting rules are weak, and the new rules that are in process right now are looking to be some of the weakest in New England and in the country. So, because trash is a multi-billion-dollar business, and private companies, because of a federal clause, are using New Hampshire as their dumping ground, they will continue to buy property and try to build landfills based upon their profit, not the needs of New Hampshire citizens. We encourage all private businesses to build here or come to New Hampshire to improve our economy, improve our communities, and be good stewards to our environment. But this is not a typical private business. Landfills should be built based upon need. Do we really want New Hampshire to become the trash state? The state is letting private businesses drive the trash bus, which is not in the best interest for Granite Staters. If we do things right with reduction, recycling, and new technology to include incineration, because it's huge, there's some really amazing things with incineration now that we're not even looking at in New Hampshire. We should only need one new landfill in the next century. So this bill is based upon one landfill, possibly, that we could need. So this bill enables a public-private partnership. The only thing that the state owns is the land. That's it. This saves the private company time and money. The private company runs everything else. This is the standard practice everywhere in this country and Maine, as was talked about previously, with the same landfill provider that's previously mentioned up north in Bethlehem. These are not New Hampshire private businesses either that are here running the two largest landfills here. They are actually, their companies are headquartered in Texas and Vermont. So this bill enables the state to pick a site with good soil, located near the major sources of in-state generation, rather than being at the mercy of a company and landowner who don't care about the safety or truck traffic or distance. And this bill enables us to put New Hampshire taxpayers' trash first. HB 1145 would not require New Hampshire to reduce the flow of out-of-state trash. It merely allows us to do so if we choose. So let's say, for example, the next landfill that gets built, let's say it's 15 or 20 years from now, that could be the last landfill that we have in 100 years. If we're only taking in New Hampshire trash and we realize that there's an opportunity to take in more, we have the discretion to ratchet it up, 10%, 15%, even 25%, or ratchet it down if needed. So we could basically turn on and turn off the flow, wholly or partially, as we see fit and as circumstances change. I want to just quickly, I know that's been a long day, the letter that we received in our House Committee on Environment and Agriculture, as well as what you guys all received from DES, has some things that just don't make sense. So they had said a landfill that we need and can't get, in quotes. So, but they didn't mention that based upon the studies that have been done, that we don't need a new landfill until 2034, and realistically, 2054 or later. Also, the state may lack requisite expertise to build a landfill. Well, that doesn't apply here, because the state would not build or operate it. They would just acquire the land. So if the commissioner is saying that DES doesn't know how to tell a good site from a bad one, well, then we're in a heap of trouble at this point. Concerns about liability. Someone else talked about that. I have the indemnification clause that is from the public-private landfill that Casella is operating, Juniper Ridge in Maine. They've solved that problem by contract on terms that are favorable, of course, to the state and to the company. I don't have to read that. So from all of my research and from my conversations about public-private landfills, they work well. So I'm sure if there is a rep, and I think there is, or representatives here from Waste Management, they can correct me if I'm wrong, and I'd love you to see if that can happen. I and others have not heard from the largest company in New Hampshire anything wrong with this model. And that's, of course, right in my backyard where I live. The other piece in the message or the letter from DES was there was a lack of a suitable site. So if there's a lack of if the state right now is worried, right, about a tract of property, based upon the waste management testimony from 2 weeks ago in this committee, we have 30 years minimum before we need another landfill. And lastly, the inability to obtain financing. So the Casella agreement, very interestingly enough, in their agreement, they actually paid $26 million up front in their contract to have the land. So even though the state owns the property, Casella paid that. That was part of their deal. So, and I just have to say, it's pretty incredible to suggest that a piece of land that can earn over $1 billion in tipping fees can be hard to finance when the land itself will likely cost, whatever, $20 million, $25 million or less. And then the other thing was inability to obtain local support that was mentioned in there. And I just have to say, from my time of being in this process and talking about trash, it doesn't seem that anyone that is very interested in the pros or the cons from the locals. There's a lot of things that are discarded and a lot of people that are not being listened to. So that's all I have to say, and I strongly support this bill.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. We have another co-sponsor here. Who is that? That is, who's another co-sponsor? Jamon? Yeah, there you go. There. I was looking for that. Nick? I was looking for your name and I had my eyeballs were right on it. I guess I'm getting tired.
Well, I appreciate the recognition. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Try not to be redundant. Difficult at this point. But I just wanted to hit the point that this bill does everything that we would want with regards to being able to limit out-of-state waste, right? So it allows us to set kind of whatever number that we want. It allows us also to discriminate between different kinds of out-of-state waste, something that we can't currently do, right? So we could say we are not going to take certain PFAS-rich materials like mattresses and carpets, for example, from out of state, although they could still be landfilled from granite staters, right? So it allows us to discriminate. It also allows us to charge a different rate for in-state and out-of-state waste, right? So that for an operator who would be making less because you're taking in less out-of-state waste, there's some compensation for that in the fact that they can actually increase the amount that they're charging for out-of-state waste. And we're not in any danger that Massachusetts is going to stop sending their waste to us anytime soon, even if we increase those rates significantly. So this bill would allow us to do all of those things. I would like to briefly address some of the concerns raised by DES in the letter signed by Commissioner Scott. And again, I'll be very brief because I know it's come up before. The lack of requisite expertise. It is, in that sense, no different from how we go about siting and constructing landfills now. It is an agreement between the state, with the expertise we have at DES, with the operator, whoever that is. We have a couple of major operators in our state. And I sent you all this morning a copy. I didn't want to print it out. It's 75 pages of the lease agreement between the state of Maine and Casella, and it goes into detail about how that relationship between the state and the expertise with the company comes together in order to site and build that landfill properly. concerns about liability. We had, as amended on the House floor, we inserted a part of the bill that addresses liability. But again, if you look at Section 8 in the lease agreement between the state of Maine and Casella, you will see a very detailed indemnification clause that would hold the state not liable in the case of leaks that are a result of operator error. Lack of a suitable site, if that's a problem under this bill, it's a problem now. We either have suitable sites in the state or we don't. That quite honestly is a head scratcher to me. Whether it's a publicly owned or privately owned landfill, the question about whether or not we have a suitable site in the state is the same either way. So why this bill would affect that, I'm not sure. Inability to secure financing, of course, it would require expenditures from the state, but as Representative Potenza pointed out, and as you can see in detail in the lease agreement between Casella and Maine, this is profitable enough that Casella was willing to put up $26 million to operate a facility in Maine that they don't physically own the land for. I think that is a pretty good indication of their understanding of how this suits their business model very well. As Representative Bixby pointed out, this is not new. More than 50% of the landfills across the United States, including many in New England, are publicly owned, either by states or political subdivisions. And I want to point out that the two major operators here in New Hampshire, Waste Management and Casella, they both are completely familiar with this model. As I said, in Maine, Casella paid $26 million to be able to operate that landfill at Juniper Ridge. That's a 30-year lease agreement, right? And they're seeking to extend that now, right? So this is a stable agreement. It is in the best interests of both the operator and the state to continue that agreement, right? We're not talking about an unstable market where there's the possibility that they are going to lose the right to operate that landfill after 10 or 15 years when they're invested in it. It is in the interests of both the state for stability in terms of that market for waste and in the interests of the operator to make sure that they are operating it under the conditions specified in the lease, because it is an extraordinarily profitable enterprise. And at a 30-year lease, we're talking about much longer than what DES currently permits landfills for here in New Hampshire, right? So, I mean, this is a long-term, stable economic agreement. Waste Management has a really interesting and innovative publicly owned landfill that they operate in Monroe County in New York. And as I was looking into that facility management, they've had that contract since 2002, so more than 20 years they have successfully been operating that facility. And they have a really innovative renewable energy facility there at that landfill. And by burning the gas, right, that comes up from the decomposition of material at the landfill site, they can produce enough energy, clean energy, to provide energy for more than 6,000 homes, right? So that is the kind of really interesting, innovative model that we can emulate and hopefully even do better than if we have a landfill which is publicly owned, privately operated. As I said, both Casella and Waste Management know how to do this. They do it in other states, and they do it extraordinarily well. So it is the definition of a win-win proposal.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator Waters.
Yeah, thank you. And it's been a long day, and if I missed any answer to these questions as I was dashing in and out, please let me know. And you can be as brief as need be. Under this model, then, is the assumption that the state would select and determine the suitability of a site before it finds a permittee?
Yes, thank you very much, Senator, for the question. Yes, and one of the benefits...
No, that's the yes was all I needed, okay?
Okay.
Really, the yes was all I needed on that one.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. Good.
Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Representative. Representative Jared Sullivan.
Thank you to the committee for allowing me to testify. I came straight from work, which is why I'm dressed like this and not nicer. Okay, so I guess the people in this committee don't really know much about me, but my background is I'm an economist, and so I have worked. I've been a pretty strong advocate for the free market. I use my platform here as an elected representative to advocate for the benefits of using the free market to allocate resources. I think it's the best, most efficient way to do it. I have given impassioned speeches on the floor of the House arguing against passing bills because I think it's in such violation of free market principles. So given my history, it's probably a surprise that I come out in support of this bill. And the reason that I come about this is that the idea of government injecting itself into a major industry like that generally would be something that would kind of make my hair stand up a little bit. But this situation, the market is hardly free. And I would argue that it's not a free market because it's so heavily distorted by the policies going on in other states. And so, for example, in Massachusetts, you're not allowed to build another landfill. They've not only done that, they've gone further to try to save the landfills that are open. They are they're prohibiting any sort of construction material from being landfilled in New Hampshire or in Massachusetts, which means it's coming up to places like here. So these market distorting policies implemented by our neighboring states negatively impact New Hampshire by preventing the market forces from working their magic, those forces that I generally get very excited by. I think HB 1145 provides us a tool to help regulate something that currently cannot be regulated, which is what the previous bill that was just heard was sort of discussed about. That's another way to do it, but there's a lot of potential risks that couldn't work with the Interstate Commerce Clause. This is a way to get around that to allow us to actually regulate something that currently is out of the hands, or at least a lot of people think is out of the hands of New Hampshire regulators. I'm going to skip over the majority of my rebuttal to the DES letter because I think the previous speakers did a pretty good job. But I will say, in the spirit of the free market, the idea that they won't be able to get financing suggests that the free market doesn't work, and it does. And so if this is a profitable private partnership, they'll be able to get funding. But also in the process of doing that, they're going to come up with their best contract with the state. So presumably if there's a site that's found that's suitable to site a landfill, you're going to have Waste Management and Casella and, I don't know, First Republic, whatever other companies are out there, are going to show up and say, hey, we think this is a profitable opportunity. Here's our contract with the state so we can, here's our best bid. And all of those companies are going to come up with things, and that's going to incorporate some of the local concerns. And so when the time comes, there'll be a committee, a board, whatever it might be, DES, I don't know who will be in charge of that, but they'll look at the different proposals that are given, and that will be a good way to sort of address, the financing thing, I can assure you will not be a problem if it's going to be a profitable project. And obviously we know that it would be a profitable project because there are people wanting to build landfills currently as we speak in the state. And they can address the local support thing because that is a legitimate concern, but that's going to be a concern regardless. Look what's happening right now in Dalton. Nobody's particularly excited about that. There's always going to be people fighting landfills regardless of where they are. And so you're going to have to come up with a good package to, sell your deal to get the next landfill that's built in New Hampshire that's the land is owned by the state. I was disappointed in the DES for what I believe to be a disingenuous and biased analysis in their fiscal note. They claim to be neutral, but then they discuss potential negatives and how those negatives will drive up costs. Now, if you're truly unbiased and you're neutral, you should talk about the pros of this model and the cons of this model to give you guys the fair perspective. They didn't do that. They only talked about negatives. And I think that should raise a little bit of a red flag in the credibility of the author of those letters and those analyses. This analysis relied on basic supply and demand framework, where DS suggests that supply will decrease and demand will stay the same or grow. This is sloppy analysis, as the assumption that demand will hold constant or grow ignores the point of this bill, which is to reduce out-of-state trash. If we were to reduce out-of-state waste, which is previously discussed not being landfilled in various states because of the free market's not working because of regulations against in other states, then the free market, the free market isn't working because of that. So we need to have some sort of restrictions to reduce the stuff coming in from other states. We might actually see less demand. We might actually see the demand curve, if you have studied that, shift to the left, which could actually reduce costs. So their analysis was based on assumptions that didn't include the intent of this bill, which again, I think raises red flags for just the quality of the analysis that they gave you when thinking about this. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much. Sure, that's. Rep. Linda, you didn't say whether you wanted to speak or not, but you're in support.
For the record, Representative Linda Haskins, Rockingham 11, Exeter. I just want to say that we're not talking about just any old business. We are talking about a billion-dollar business, and we're talking about one that we need to get right because it has, while it may be a necessary evil to put trash in the ground, it has enormous health and safety repercussions, which is why it's not like just any other business. And a point made by one of my esteemed colleagues on the committee about this not impacting any current application, I want to correct, because if we get this right and we put in public ownership of any landfills going forward, that would include any that are not yet determined, although an application may be in process. So the Senate committee has an opportunity to ensure that the state of New Hampshire takes one step farther to protect citizens of New Hampshire by securing the right to exercise oversight of landfills. HB 1145 brings New Hampshire into line with other states who are moving to municipally owned landfills to insist that regulations and rules be met. On the contrary, local governments that transfer ownership of landfills to private out-of-state entities lose control of disposal prices and future capacity. Public-private partnerships are the best way to ensure that municipalities engage with industry on the basis of need, not merely profit. The trash business is a lucrative one, and we can be assured that private companies will still want to do business in New Hampshire if they are municipally owned and industry operated, much like my prior colleague established. Going forward, we must make wise decisions with regard to landfills. We need to insist on better food packaging, recycling, and reducing what goes into landfills, all of which are part of the solution we need to meet our goals. Public ownership is one way we can retain control over solid waste to live up to the goals that we have already stated for New Hampshire. I urge passage of 1145. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you. Heidi from Heidi Tremire. Heidi, thank you.
Heidi Tremarco from the Conservation Law Foundation. I'm sorry, I try to use my best handwriting.
You did very well.
But
It's me.
It's
I have a problem.
my kids will always say I have terrible handwriting. I actually think all the comments have been covered today. I don't want to take the committee's time. I emailed my comments in, so I have them here, but I think that if you receive them in email, I don't need.
Yeah, I just hand them over. That'd be fine.
Thank you very much. I just want to urge the committee to vote out to pass. We strongly support this bill.
Thank you very much. Tom? Mr. T? Welcome back.
Thank you. All I can say is wow, because no matter what I had planned to say, I think it was covered by the rest of the folks that had the opportunity to speak today. For the record, my name is Tom Tower. I'm a resident of Whitefield, and I'm representing North Country Alliance for Balanced Change. And I do want to thank the committee, Senator Waters, Senator Altshuler, and of course you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to speak. I also want to thank all of the sponsors and the co-sponsors for their strong advocacy for this bill. So a real quick story, and I guarantee this will be quick because everything has been covered. But about 38 years ago, the state made a decision to privatize solid waste in the state of New Hampshire. And then fast forward now, and I think at that time they probably had some really good reasons for why they did that. So fast forward, you had a little bit of a gap with an updated solid waste plan, and what do you have? You have a disproportionate amount of export compared to import. The state of New Hampshire imports 900,000 tons of trash from out of state, in comparison to only 5% going the other way. When you talk to Granite Staters across the state, unless you have a vested interest in putting a brand new landfill in the state of New Hampshire, 99% of them, when you ask them the question and you tell them what's going on with this disproportionate amount coming in compared to what's going out, they're aghast. Nobody wants New Hampshire to be the dumping ground of the rest of New England, and it's because the state has been behind and lax in putting some restrictions in place to ensure that that balance is more equitable. As a result of the exposure as to what's going on over the last 4 years, last year Senator Donovan Fenton proposed what was Senate Bill 159, and out of that there was a subcommittee, Mr. Chair, that you sat on, Representative Germana, Representative Rochefort, and others, and they talked about a list of things that they could do to curtail this inequity. And one of the things that they actually listed was this concept of what would be state-owned land and then leasing it out to an operator to manage the solid waste. So that's just completely spawned out of that activity because of the outrage that's going on with this inequity. The other thing I'll mention is that some people spoke about this, potentially being bad for business. Look, it's not unprecedented in the state of New Hampshire to have an arrangement like this. There's a Colorado-based company that currently operates Mount Sunapee. The state owns the land, so it's not unprecedented here. The other piece that I'll emphasize, because I had a conversation on a sidebar with Senator Pearl yesterday, and he asked about indemnification, and he asked about liability. Look, we've got enough Superfund sites in this state already, and we know what they represent and the amount of pain and anguish, both from an environmental pain and suffering and economic perspective, right? But at the end of the day, if the state enters into this model with 1145, they have the opportunity to strengthen those, protections against future liability than they do with the current model today, with DES rules as they exist today. So by contract, as what people have spoken about before, there's examples. There's examples in upstate New York. There's examples in Maine. If we follow those examples, we can actually put more protective measures in place to ensure that monies are there, not just while the owner, not just while the operator is operating the landfill, but 50 years, 60 years, 100 years, and Lord knows that according to the EPA, that every one of these bad boys will leak at some point, whether it be today or 50 or 100 years from now. So we better make sure that we've got mechanisms in place. This bill has the opportunity to be able to enhance those protections. And lastly, I'm going to urge you to support 1145 for two reasons. The first reason is there's very few people in the state of New Hampshire that want to be New England's dump. So that's one. And the second is the stuff that's being imported into the state is a hell of a lot more dangerous than we ever knew. 4 parts per trillion on this PFAS, and nobody knows what the hell to do with it. So why would we entertain this inequity knowing that this stuff is as toxic and as poisonous as it is? I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the long trip down here to testify. We appreciate it.
Thank you, committee.
And so with that, Kirsten.
Sarah testified?
Not yet. She's
she's
last.
going to-
Yeah, I'm
okay,
taking her you're doing the follow-up.
Just wanted to check.
I figured you should hear it all. Sorry.
Again, no, that's okay. Kirsten Koch, still for BIA. My testimony goes into a lot of detail, so I'll be brief. BIA is opposed to this bill. I've heard a lot of testimony already saying this is good for business. As the voice for business in the statewide Chamber of Commerce, I will say this is bad for business. Our issue is that this bill proposes a ban without a plan. The proposed mandate does not adequately address the details of what it would take for a state-owned, privately operated facility. Just to name a few examples, the bill does not address the development of the facility, designating a state department to administer it, describing how the site would be chosen, the price structure, and a number of other details. Without provisions on how the state can possibly execute this facility, we have concerns that this bill would likely result in nothing more than just a prohibition on private landfill ownership without ever developing anything new. The state cannot undertake this proposal without the involvement of private industry, and we believe that this vague proposal lacking guidance or business protections is rather unattractive to private industry. You've heard comments already that this has been done in other states, but we don't have the model set up to do that. We don't have the details to do that. Most of this would be left to a contract. We are not the state of Maine. There's no way of knowing if this would be a good deal or a bad one. I think Senator Waters' line of questioning earlier about whether we could possibly get private industry to operate this is a serious question to consider. I agree also with Chairwoman Aaron that the devil's really in the details here, or maybe the details that we don't have. Ultimately, we'd ask you not to pass this bill, task the state with landfill ownership and paying no attention to the details. We just have concerns that this bill is not ready for prime time. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Kirsten.
Thank you.
And our final speaker, Sarah. Smile. Is there? Who?
Eric Steinhauser was on the first page of that list.
My bad. Yes. Thank you. Eric, you want to go up first?
Thank you.
I apologize. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for hearing me. For the record, my name is Eric Steinhauser. Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Eric Steinhauser. I'm a senior vice president and principal with the firm, New Hampshire-based firm Sanborn Head and Associates. I was just reminded I needed to give you my quick qualifications. Not only do I work for Sanborn Head, I represent licensed professionals on the Waste Management Council. And on the Waste Management Council, I represent them on the solid waste working group. My testimony today is mine, not representing a client, a site, the Waste Management Council, or the solid waste working group. My testimony is based on over 20 years of work in the state of New Hampshire, 35 years in general. I'm a professional engineer in 16 states, including New Hampshire. The bulk of my work is in solid waste. I have concerns about this bill. You have my written testimony. I won't go through that, but just to hit some highlights. I'm very aware of 3 sites that are publicly owned, privately operated. The Juniper Ridge site I've worked at in Maine, town of Colony in New York, that's north of Albany, and I'm very familiar with the Monroe County site in New York that's operated by Waste Management. I'm also very aware of privately owned facilities that are privately operated and publicly owned facilities that are publicly operated. They all work. One model doesn't fit all, and one isn't better than another. So the question is this bill mandating one option good for New Hampshire? That's the question that I propose to you. The concern would be that right now we don't have a publicly owned site ready for development. In Maine, Juniper Ridge was a permitted site. It was a paper mill site that the state took over the ownership. So when Casella came in there, they had a permitted facility. A lot of the work to figure out if it works was done, and they were able to go forward. Waste Connections up in town of Colony also took over an existing facility, and I believe Waste Management in Monroe County did the same. So in New Hampshire, the difference is we don't have a site. Someone would have to spend a lot of money. When I testified a week or two ago about the cost of developing a site, someone's putting up front millions of dollars to figure out if something's going to work. A private company's not, in my mind, not going to be putting up that kind of money unless they know they're going to have a guarantee of a site working, unless they're rolling the dice on their own project. The other concern is, would a publicly owned facility be any easier to permit than a privately owned one? So if there was a site that was under challenge because a private company is doing it, and the state found that that's the best site in the state to develop it, is it all of a sudden okay to develop that site? another question that would come forward here. So the unintended consequences of a bill like this, I think, need to be judged. In the 1990s, many of the political subdivisions in the state had their own landfills. If you go to the DES website, there's about 250 of them, mostly municipally owned, are all closed. If there can't be one state landfill, are we forcing these municipalities to develop a whole bunch of other smaller landfills? And if they were doing that because they can limit their service area, are we putting them in competition with each other? Are we knocking other folks out from having places to dispose of their waste? It makes another political quagmire, I think, in the future. I don't want to take much more of your time. I have much more in here. It'd be clearer for you to read than for me to go over, but happy to answer questions or talk about this at your convenience.
Waters for the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your very thorough letter. So I had asked earlier about the issue about whether the state would have to select and determine the suitability of a site before it got a permit for someone to construct it and operate it. So, and the fiscal note that we have from DES doesn't actually contemplate that because it really only talks about post-permitting costs. So, is it your sense that the state, if the state were going to do one of these, or a municipality, that site selection process, they wouldn't probably necessarily have to hire somebody to do that, and that could be costly?
Thank you for your question. Yes, I agree. I'm not in the business of buying, I'm not a real estate person, I'm not in the business of running a landfill. But in my mind, someone has to decide the site is worthy for future, there have to be some amount of work done. Some could be a paper study, GIS and all that to find an area and a site that meets a whole bunch of criteria. The location, not only for the hydrogeologic issues, but the transportation issues, the land cost issues, a whole bunch of things that need to be taken into consideration. That would have to be vetted out. There would have to be discussions with potential partners and how they want to approach the business deal on that, how much they might want to put up versus the state. In my letter, I talk about someone has to put up a lot of money to do the studies to get to a point where an application could even go into DES that has some completeness so someone can make a decision. Granted, a lot of applications go into the state. There's some back and forth because they want more information, they want more study. The process is long, years, tens of years maybe, depending on the site. I've worked with clients looking at sites that we spent time on and then we nix because they don't work.
Follow. So you may have heard my earlier question about if we were to adopt the earlier bill on the 15%, what's your professional opinion as to whether if the state is operating a landfill and can only take 15% from out of state, could it be economically feasible for just in-state trash, or is that just too speculative?
I'm not an economist and I didn't study the bill enough to really opine on it. I would say that the bill has merits like any bill does. It's just, what's the devil in the details. Whether it's publicly operated or privately operated, the facility can't be running in the red. It has to make money. It has to pay their staff. They have to take care of equipment. They have to do their compliance. They have to respond to things that happen on the site. So it has to make money. Their revenue source is from tipping fees. So if, again, not the economist, but I took an economy class, supply and demand, if their waste they're bringing in goes down, they still have the capital and operating costs to cover. It's got to be generated somewhere else. So many of the sites I work at in New Hampshire have or are developing energy projects. they're not owned by the landfill, they're owned by another developer, so there's another partnership. So there are other revenue sources that can come out of a landfill, but not, to my understanding, the degree that it covers like the whole operating cost of a landfill. As regulations get tighter and tougher, and people talk about PFAS, we all generate the waste. We're wearing stuff that has PFAS. We use stuff that has PFAS. It goes into our trash. It goes into the landfill. The landfill has to deal with it. And they're seeing rising costs in dealing with those materials. I don't see those costs going down, so tipping fees will tend to go up. I don't want to opine
That's good, thank you.
on limiting waste.
No, I'm just gonna get off just a little bit, and I'm gonna ask about incineration. I'm kind of like zeroing in on that because for some reason, I think I heard in committee that we can reduce our tonnage by 2/3. Now, I know we're not talking about that in this bill, but is that an alternative that you've seen that's working somewhere?
Yes. We're going to call them waste to energy facilities because the incineration means you're just burning the trash. The modern facilities are burning the trash, but they're making energy out of it. The last one I know permitted was down in Florida. And we had two in New Hampshire. One is still operating up just north of here in Pennacook. I think that's a valid option. We're not reducing waste, which I still think is important to do, but the amount of material that has to be landfilled, that ash needs to go somewhere. Municipal waste ash, my understanding, is very little reuses for that. You can reclaim some metals out of that still, but they do a lot of that up front. You still have to throw that stuff away, just like we do with our regular trash, but the volume is a lot different, a lot less. So there are discussions I hear about people thinking about developing those. Those also get a lot of opposition. Smaller landmass, but other issues to them.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Sarah? And making you go last wasn't a punishment, by the way. It was just so you could hear all what people are saying.
It's okay, I would have been here anyways.
Yeah. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you again. And for the record, again, my name is Sarah Uhas Kern, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Waste Management Division at the Department of Environmental Services. I'll keep my comments really brief so that you have time for questions if you would like. Thought I'd start out by mentioning that there are no laws or regulations preventing public ownership of landfills in New Hampshire right now, and there are a number of publicly owned landfills in the state, in Conway, Berlin, Lebanon, and Nashua. So I don't read the bill as enabling public ownership of landfills. I read it as preventing private ownership of landfills. And it's in that restriction of who can own landfills that we have a concern. Our agency has not taken a position on the bill, but I'll tell you about the concern. We're concerned that a public entity may not opt to build a new landfill. We have experience, of course, with the state budgeting process. It's possible that an appropriation would not be approved for a new landfill, or that there'd be an appropriation for the siting, but not for the construction of the landfill on the state level. When you talk about small towns, it's possible that small towns would not be comfortable constructing a landfill for the reasons listed in the commissioner's letter, having to do with liability, siting, the expertise that they would need to own and operate a landfill. And our concern is that if public entities do not opt to construct new landfills, then we could run into a capacity problem in the future that would affect the solid waste market in a way that would drive up the cost of disposal. That's pretty much a quick summary of our concern. So what questions can I answer for you?
Senator Waters for the question.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And you've heard me ask the question before, that if this process envisions the state having to select a suitable site, and your fiscal note does not address that process as a cost. It only addresses the process of operation. So would you imagine then that the cost one way or another have to be borne by the state, or if it's a municipality, in terms of the cost of selecting and determining suitability?
I apologize for that because I think it should have been addressed in the fiscal note. There's absolutely high costs associated with locating a site and making sure that it meets all the criteria in our solid waste rules.
Can we ask for that? For another fiscal note, or look at another,
I think it's going to be
too late for that?
I mean, I just think it's going to be kind of vague, say, yeah, there probably would be, but
As we have never done that before and paid for it ourselves,
Right.
we'd have a hard time, I think, coming up with the numbers for you. But I know that hydrogeologic investigations, which we pay for other purposes sometimes, can be on the order of $50,000 or $100,000 for the amount of work that would need to be done, or more, or maybe you'd have to investigate more than one site. And someone would have to bear that cost, and I suppose it could be worked out in the contract. It's hard to imagine that the state would not be responsible for some of it.
And sorry to ask another question. And by the way, since it's after 4:30, we're all on time and a half, and I assume you are too, right? Okay, but that said, if you can't answer this now, could you I think I know the answer, but if you can't, would you please ask the department? My assumption is, on the selection of a site, that the provisions of RSA 4:30 on eminent domain would be available to the state?
I would assume so.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you so much.
We're going to close the hearing now on 11:45 FN.
Well, I bet you're happy.
We're dismissed.
I got to ask you a question.